"We will handle this at home," my father insisted, standing over my hospital bed after my sister's violent attack. But the emergency room doctor took one look at my x-rays and made a call that shattered our family secrets. When the police arrived, everything changed. My name is Abigail, and at 33 years old, I work as a senior medical billing auditor. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to a family who tried to silence your truth. The glaring, sterile fluorescent lights of the trauma bay at Mercy General Hospital burned directly through my eyelids, casting long, harsh shadows across the small room. I lay perfectly flat on a stiff, narrow medical gurney, the thin paper sheet beneath me crinkling loudly with every shallow, agonizing breath I managed to take. The air in the room was thick and heavy, smelling intensely of sharp antiseptic, bleached cotton, and strong rubbing alcohol, a harsh chemical cocktail that made my empty stomach churn with intense nausea. My right arm rested awkwardly on a makeshift padded splint positioned closely beside my body. It was swollen to nearly twice its normal size, the pale skin stretched tight and radiating a deep, relentless fire that seemed to pulse in perfect, terrifying time with my racing heart. Every single time my chest expanded to draw in a necessary breath of the cold hospital air, a jagged, hot spike of pain shot straight through my ribs, stealing my breath away completely before I could even fully inhale. The steady, high-pitched, rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor stationed next to my bed was the only undeniable proof I was still functioning, a digital heartbeat that attempted to mask the absolute blinding chaos raging inside my mind. I stared straight up at the stark white ceiling tiles, desperately trying to focus all of my attention on their uniform grid pattern just to keep myself from screaming out loud in pure agony. I was lying in a hospital, a place explicitly meant for healing, comfort, and safety, but the real suffocating danger was standing right next to my bed. My father, Thomas, was not holding my good left hand. He was not gently brushing the matted, sweat-soaked hair away from my feverish forehead. Nor was he frantically asking the passing triage nurses for more pain medication to ease my severe suffering. Instead, he was pacing the small curtained confines of the trauma bay, like a trapped, furious animal, his expensive polished leather shoes squeaking sharply and repeatedly against the spotless linoleum floor. He wore his tailored navy blue suit, the specific one he always saved for highly important business meetings and elite country club dinners, though his silk tie was now slightly loosened at the collar. His jaw was clenched so incredibly tight I could clearly see the rigid muscles jumping and twitching near his ear, a clear physical signal of his rapidly growing impatience with the entire medical situation. He kept aggressively checking his heavy gold wristwatch, letting out loud, highly annoyed sighs, as if my severe, potentially life-altering medical emergency was nothing more than a tedious, frustrating delay in his very busy daily schedule. He did not ask how my arm felt. He did not ask if I needed water. He simply marched back and forth, radiating an aura of absolute resentment that filled the tiny hospital room. He stopped. His relentless pacing abruptly reached deep into the inner breast pocket of his tailored suit jacket and pulled out a crumpled, multi-page hospital accident report form. With a swift, incredibly aggressive motion, he slammed the paperwork down directly onto my lap. The stiff paper fluttered against my uninjured thigh, feeling as heavy as lead. I flinched violently at the sudden sharp sound, the abrupt movement sending a fresh, blinding wave of pure agony radiating from my shattered shoulder all the way down to my numb, tingling fingertips. I looked up at his face, my vision swimming slightly from the intense combination of physical pain and profound emotional shock, desperately searching for a single trace of the protective, caring father I had always foolishly hoped he could eventually be. I found absolutely nothing but cold, calculating irritation staring back at me from his dark eyes. He leaned heavily over the cold metal side rail of the medical gurney, bringing his rigid face uncomfortably close to mine. I could strongly smell the stale black coffee and sharp peppermint gum on his breath. His voice dropped to a harsh, commanding whisper, intentionally pitched low, so it would cut straight through the chaotic background noise of the busy emergency room, without drawing the unwanted attention of the medical staff working just outside our thin privacy curtain. "Sign it," he demanded, pulling a heavy silver pen from his pocket and forcefully tapping it against the bottom signature line of the legal form. I stared at the stark black ink on the paper, my mind desperately struggling to process the sheer audacity of his demand over the blinding, deafening pain completely consuming my broken body. He tapped the heavy pen again, much harder this time, leaving a small indentation on the document. "When the nurse comes back in here, you tell them you tripped over the thick foyer rug. You look them directly in the eye, and you tell them you lost your balance because you were walking too fast in those ridiculous high heels of yours. Do you hear me? You fell down the stairs all on your own. It was nothing but a clumsy, stupid accident." My chest tightened so severely that for a terrifying, breathless moment, I could not draw any oxygen into my burning lungs at all. A trip over a rug. That was the convenient, perfectly sanitized story he had quickly decided on while following the loud ambulance sirens all the way from our family estate to the hospital doors. He leaned in even closer, his dark eyes narrowing into sharp, threatening slits that promised severe consequences if I dared to disobey his direct orders. "Chelsea's wedding to Ryan is in exactly 2 weeks." He hissed, his tone laced with absolute chilling finality that left no room for negotiation or truth. "Ryan's family is paying for absolutely everything. They are reserving the entire grand ballroom at the country club, they are hiring the most expensive caterers in the city, and they are flying in highly important wealthy guests from out of state. Do not ruin your sister's future with your usual dramatic attention-seeking behavior." My younger sister Chelsea was 30 years old, the undisputed, heavily protected golden child of our family, and currently engaged to a man whose family wealth was their absolute golden ticket out of their hidden financial ruin. To protect that extravagant high society wedding, to fiercely protect her flawless, picture-perfect image from any negative scrutiny, my father was actively, aggressively ordering me to completely cover up the horrific reality of what had just happened to my body. He grabbed my uninjured left hand, forcefully pressing the silver pen against my palm, his fingers digging painfully into my soft skin. "Sign the paper right now, Abigail." I stared down at the heavy silver pen in my father's outstretched hand. My vision was swimming from the intense pain radiating through my shattered right arm, but my mind had never been clearer. He thrust the pen closer to my face, the polished metal catching the harsh fluorescent light of the trauma bay. He actually wanted me to sign a hospital accident report, stating I had tripped over a rug. He wanted me to legally absolve my sister of pushing me down a steep flight of hardwood stairs. I slowly lifted my chin and met his furious gaze. I did not reach for the pen. I kept my uninjured left hand firmly clamped against the cold metal edge of the medical gurney. "I am not signing that," I said. My voice was a harsh rasp, tight with physical agony, but the absolute certainty in my tone made my father blink in surprise. He opened his mouth to bark another order, but I turned my head away from him. My gaze landed on my mother, Catherine. She was sitting comfortably in the corner of the small trauma room, her legs casually crossed. She was meticulously filing her immaculate acrylic nails with a crystal emery board, completely unbothered by the chaos surrounding us. She had not asked the triage nurses for ice to ease my swelling. She had not asked the attending doctor for a status update on my severe condition. She was simply waiting for the tedious inconvenience of my hospitalization to be over so she could get back to planning a party. "Chelsea did not bump into me," I stated flatly, ensuring every single word carried the undeniable weight of the truth. "She cornered me on the second-story landing. She ripped Grandma's heirloom sapphire necklace right off my neck, breaking the solid gold chain. She screamed that it belonged with her designer wedding dress, and when I asked for it back, she placed both of her hands flat against my chest and shoved me backward down 14 hardwood stairs." My mother paused her frantic nail filing. She let out a loud, exaggerated scoff that echoed sharply off the sterile tile walls. She rolled her eyes so hard I thought they might get permanently stuck. Oh, stop being so relentlessly dramatic, Abigail, she sighed, her tone dripping with absolute boredom. Chelsea just bumped into you by accident. You have always been incredibly clumsy. Besides, why were you even standing so close to the landing? You know how anxious your sister gets when she is wedding planning. You probably provoked her by refusing to share the necklace in the first place. It was not mine to share, Mom. I replied, my breathing intentionally shallow to protect my aching ribs. Grandma specifically willed that sapphire to me. It is the only thing of hers I have left. It matches Chelsea's color scheme perfectly, my mother countered, waving her hand dismissively. You could have just been a supportive sister for once in your life. Chelsea is under a tremendous amount of stress right now with the wedding to Ryan only 2 weeks away, and here you are trying to make everything about yourself as usual. I closed my eyes, a fresh wave of nausea washing over me as the broken bones shifted in my chest. Jealous and dramatic. Those were the exact words my parents always weaponized whenever I dared to hold my 30-year-old sister accountable for her actions. Chelsea was the undisputed golden child of the family. She had floated effortlessly through her 20s on my parents' credit cards, failing out of 3 different expensive college programs before declaring she wanted to be a luxury lifestyle influencer. When she racked up massive debts to fund her aesthetic, my father quietly paid them off. When she wrecked her car driving home from a late-night party, my mother blamed the poor city lighting and immediately bought her a brand-new luxury SUV. I, on the other hand, had spent my entire life being emotionally sidelined and financially drained to constantly pave my sister's golden path. I worked my way through a grueling university program without a single dime of their assistance. I spent late nights studying complex algorithms and compliance laws, eventually securing a highly demanding but lucrative career as a senior forensic data analyst. I audited massive medical billing systems, tracing hidden digital assets and uncovering financial fraud for large hospital networks. I was practical, responsible, and entirely self-sufficient. But in my family, being responsible was treated as a fundamental character flaw. It meant I did not need their constant attention, which meant they were free to give all of it to Chelsea. The profound irony of my mother accusing me of seeking attention was that this entire family was currently surviving purely because of my silent charity. 3 years ago, my father's boutique logistics business went completely bankrupt. He had hidden the massive financial ruin from everyone maintaining his expensive country club memberships and lavish vacations until the bank finally came knocking. They were weeks away from losing the massive historic estate we had grown up in. They were going to be homeless and publicly humiliated in front of their wealthy peers. So I stepped in. I used my entire life savings, liquidated my hard-earned investment portfolios, and bought the family estate completely out of foreclosure. I paid off the massive tax liens. I put the property deed strictly in my name. I saved them from absolute ruin. But my parents could not handle the social shame of their friends knowing their quiet, overlooked middle child had to rescue them from poverty. They begged me to keep the purchase a secret. They pleaded with me to let them continue acting as the masters of the house, terrified that if their high society circle found out they were broke, they would be shunned. And more importantly, they were terrified that if Ryan's incredibly wealthy conservative investor family discovered Chelsea came from a bankrupt household, the lucrative engagement would be called off immediately. Like a fool, I agreed to their desperate terms. I allowed them to pretend they still owned the estate. I lived quietly in the converted master suite on the first floor, paying the exorbitant property taxes and the monthly maintenance bills, while they hosted lavish dinner parties upstairs, pretending absolutely nothing had changed. And now my reward for saving them from the streets was lying in a trauma bay with a shattered arm, listening to my mother defend the woman who had just tried to kill me over a piece of jewelry. "She stole the necklace, Mom," I said, my voice rising just enough to cut through the rhythmic beeping of my heart monitor. And then she pushed me. There was no bumping involved. It was a violent, deliberate attack. My father slammed his hand down on the metal rail of the gurney, his face turning an angry, mottled red. "Keep your voice down," he hissed, glancing nervously toward the closed privacy curtain. "We are handling this at home as a family. You are not going to file a police report. You are going to sign this medical form. You are going to get your cast and you are going to keep your mouth shut. Why are you protecting her? I demanded, the sheer injustice of the situation making my chest burn hotter than my fractured ribs. She threw me down a flight of stairs. I could have broken my neck. Because Chelsea is marrying into one of the most prominent families in the state, my father shot back, his tone laced with absolute venom. Ryan's family is funding a $150,000 wedding. They are giving Chelsea a platform you could never even dream of achieving on your own. If you file an assault charge, the scandal will completely destroy the wedding. Ryan's parents will pull their financial support, and this entire family will be disgraced. You mean your precious social image will be disgraced? I replied coldly. You care more about what the country club thinks than the fact that your oldest daughter has a shattered arm. My mother finally stood up, brushing imaginary lint off her expensive designer slacks. Oh, Abigail, do not play the victim. You have a roof over your head. We let you live in our beautiful estate rent-free. The least you can do is show a little gratitude and protect your sister's special day. The sheer audacity of her statement left me speechless for a long, agonizing moment. She was looking me directly in the eye, fully aware that I held the actual legal deed to the house, yet she was still treating me like a burdensome tenant who owed them a massive favor. They had lived the lie for so long that they actually believed it. They truly believed I was nothing more than an ugly, inconvenient stepping stone for Chelsea's glorious ascent into high society. I am not signing the paper, I repeated, my tone dropping into a clinical, icy register. I am telling the doctors exactly what happened. I am pressing charges against Chelsea for assault and for theft. My father leaned over me, his dark eyes wide with unhinged desperation and rage. He grabbed the fabric of my hospital gown, twisting it tightly in his fist. Listen to me very carefully. He threatened, his breath hot against my face. You will do exactly as I say. You will not destroy this family because you are bitter and alone. If you breathe a single word of this to the medical staff, I swear to God I will pack up your things and throw you out of my house tonight. You will be on the street. I stared back at him, feeling the last remaining threads of familial loyalty snap and wither away into nothing. He was threatening to evict me from the very house I owned. He was threatening to render me homeless to protect the daughter who had just broken my bones. The profound betrayal was so absolute, so entirely devoid of parental love, that it extinguished any lingering hope I had left for these people. I realized then that they were not my family. They were parasites feeding off my financial stability while actively sacrificing my physical safety to maintain their delusions of grandeur. Before I could respond to his ridiculous threat, before I could remind him whose name was actually on the property deed, the heavy curtain surrounding my trauma bay was sharply pulled back. The metal ring scraped loudly against the overhead track, announcing an interruption that neither of my parents had prepared for. Dr. Arthur Bennett stepped into the small, sterile enclosure holding a sleek silver iPad firmly against his chest. He was a tall, broad-shouldered man in his late 50s wearing crisp navy blue scrubs under a pristine, perfectly pressed white lab coat. His silver hair was neatly trimmed, and his dark-framed glasses sat perfectly level on his serious face. He radiated a calm clinical authority that immediately sucked all the frantic, aggressive energy out of my father's previous tirade. The sudden silence in the trauma bay was absolutely deafening, broken only by the steady, rhythmic beeping of my heart monitor. Dr. Bennett did not immediately look at me. His sharp, intelligent eyes fixed directly on my father's right hand, which was currently frozen mid-air, having just violently dropped my uninjured arm the very second the privacy curtain opened. My father, a man who had spent his entire adult life mastering the delicate art of the perfect corporate pivot, instantly transformed his entire demeanor. The dark, threatening scowl vanished completely from his face, swiftly replaced by a smooth, polished smile that looked entirely genuine to anyone who did not know the monster hiding underneath the expensive fabric. He quickly straightened his silk tie, smoothed the wide lapels of his tailored navy suit jacket, and took a deliberate step away from my medical bed to offer the doctor a firm, practiced handshake. "Oh, Dr. Bennett, thank goodness you are finally back," My father projected his voice with that rich, hearty tone he usually reserved for wealthy investors and elite country club presidents. We were just quietly discussing the sheer clumsiness of this whole unfortunate ordeal. My daughter has always had two left feet, unfortunately. We have been trying to tell her for years that those highly fashionable stiletto heels are a massive hazard on our polished hardwood floors. But you know how stubborn young women are. She simply lost her balance near the thick foyer rug and took a terribly nasty tumble down the steps. We are just incredibly eager to get the cast on her arm so we can take her straight home and let her rest properly in her own bed. We have a very big, highly anticipated family wedding coming up, you see, and we simply must keep her spirits up for the celebration. My mother, immediately sensing the crucial need to support my father's flawless performance, finally put down her crystal emery board. She stood up quickly from her molded plastic chair in the corner of the room, clasping her hands tightly together in front of her chest in a picture-perfect display of maternal concern. "It was a truly terrifying fall, doctor," she added, her voice trembling slightly with perfectly manufactured distress. "Just completely terrifying. I honestly thought my heart was going to stop completely when I heard the loud thud echoing through the foyer. We just want our little girl patched up and safe at home with her loving family." Dr. Bennett did not accept my father's outstretched hand. He simply let my father's arm hover awkwardly in the empty space between them until the rejection became a heavy physical weight in the tiny room. My father's polished smile faltered slightly, the tight corners of his mouth twitching nervously as he slowly lowered his hand back to his side. Dr. Bennett looked down at the bright screen of his iPad, his index finger swiping slowly and deliberately across the digital medical charts. He took his absolute time, letting the deafening silence stretch out until the thick tension in the trauma bay felt heavy enough to suffocate us all. When he finally looked up, his gaze bypassed my parents entirely and landed softly on me. "Are you currently experiencing any numbness or tingling in your right fingers, Abigail?" Dr. Bennett asked, his voice incredibly low and soothing, treating me like a living human being instead of a massive inconvenience. "A little bit," I managed to whisper, my throat incredibly dry from the pain. "It feels very cold." He nodded slowly, typing a quick, efficient note on his digital screen. "We will adjust your intravenous pain medication shortly, and we will elevate that arm further to help with the blood circulation. You are completely safe here, Abigail." He intentionally emphasized the word safe, letting its profound meaning hang heavily in the cold air before he slowly turned his body to fully face my parents. "A trip over a foyer rug." Dr. Bennett repeated my father's fabricated story, his clinical tone stripping away every single ounce of my father's fake wealthy charm. "That is a truly fascinating medical hypothesis, Mr. Wilson, especially considering the highly precise nature of the severe physical trauma I am currently looking at on these digital scans." My father instantly puffed out his chest, attempting to aggressively reclaim his lost authority in the room. "I am not a medical professional, doctor. I am just telling you what clearly happened in our family home." "Well, I am a medical professional," Dr. Bennett countered, his voice remaining dangerously calm and perfectly level. "And I have spent over 25 years in emergency medicine carefully analyzing physical trauma. What your daughter has sustained today is not a simple clean break from a clumsy fall. The X-rays clearly reveal a severe, highly complex spiral fracture of the right humerus bone. A spiral fracture exclusively occurs when a long bone is torn in half by a massive twisting force or extreme torque." He stepped much closer to my father, refusing to break eye contact for even a fraction of a second. "The sheer amount of violent twisting force required to snap a healthy adult woman's humerus bone in this specific spiral pattern is immense. It is entirely consistent with the arm being violently grabbed, aggressively twisted, and physically shoved with extreme malice. It is physically impossible to sustain this exact rotational injury simply by tripping forward over a rug and landing on a flat floor." The color rapidly drained from my mother's face. She sank heavily back down into her plastic chair in the corner, her manicured hands gripping the armrests so incredibly tightly, her knuckles turned a stark bone white. My father's square jaw tightened again, his dark eyes darting frantically around the sterile room as he desperately searched for a new lie, a new clever angle to spin the undeniable medical facts presenting themselves. "Now see here," my father stammered, his voice losing all its smooth, confident resonance. "You are making wild, completely unfounded accusations. People fall awkwardly all the time." She must have twisted around violently to catch herself on the heavy oak banister. Dr. Bennett did not let him finish his desperate excuse. He swiped his finger across the iPad screen again, bringing up a brand new set of highly detailed black and white skeletal scans. He turned the bright screen around so my father was actively forced to look directly at the glowing, undeniable images of my bruised rib cage. Furthermore, Dr. Bennett continued his clinical detachment, officially replaced by a simmering, profound professional anger. The chest scans we routinely run to check for internal bleeding caught something else entirely, something deeply concerning. Right here along the right lateral side of the rib cage. He pointed a remarkably steady finger at the screen. "You can clearly see poorly healed fractures on 3 separate ribs. Based on the extensive calcification and the highly specific pattern of the bone remodeling, these are old injuries. I would estimate they occurred roughly 10 years ago." My breath hitched painfully in my throat, sending a fresh spike of hot fire through my damaged chest. 10 years ago. The exact timeline of the severe car accident my parents had always blamed entirely on my supposedly reckless driving, even though Chelsea had been the one behind the wheel of my mother's sedan. Chelsea had been drinking heavily at a cast party, panicked when she hit a patch of wet asphalt, and wrapped the vehicle around a thick oak tree. To protect Chelsea's pristine college applications and prevent an underage DUI from hitting the local papers, my parents dragged us home in the dark. They hid the damaged car in the detached garage. They bluntly refused to take me to the hospital, blatantly ignoring my desperate cries that it hurt to breathe. They fiercely insisted I was just badly bruised and maliciously trying to cause a scene to ruin Chelsea's high school graduation week. They locked me in my bedroom, forcing me to suffer in absolute, agonizing silence for months, while my fractured ribs slowly knitted themselves back together in a jagged, crooked pattern. They prioritized Chelsea's social standing over my ability to draw oxygen into my lungs. These injuries, Dr. Bennett stated, his voice ringing with absolute, unyielding condemnation, were clearly never medically treated. They were left to heal entirely on their own, without proper alignment or medical bracing, resulting in permanent skeletal deformity. When I combine the historical evidence of extreme untreated blunt force trauma with a fresh, highly suspicious spiral fracture of the arm, a very clear, very disturbing picture begins to emerge regarding this household. My father took a massive step backward, physically retreating from the undeniable crushing weight of the doctor's words. "You are out of line, doctor. You are completely out of line. I am going to speak directly to the hospital administration about this immediate lack of professionalism. We are upstanding, wealthy citizens in this community. We donate heavily to local charities. You cannot speak to us this way. I am speaking to you as a mandated reporter under state law." Dr. Bennett replied, his posture completely unyielding. "My primary obligation is to the safety and well-being of my patient. When a patient presents with catastrophic injuries that completely contradict the family's provided narrative, and when that same patient shows a historical pattern of severe, untreated trauma, I do not ask for the family's permission to act. I follow strict protocol." My mother let out a small, terrified gasp. "Thomas," she whimpered, looking at my father with wide, panicked eyes. "What is he doing?" Dr. Bennett lowered his iPad, tucking it securely under his left arm. He looked at my parents with a gaze so incredibly cold it made the sterile hospital room feel like a freezing vault. "I have already called the local police department," he announced, his words landing like heavy, inescapable stones on the linoleum floor. "I gave them a detailed preliminary report of the suspected assault and the highly conflicting statements you provided upon arrival." My father's mouth opened wide, but absolutely no sound came out. The powerful, commanding patriarch who had threatened to throw me out on the street just 3 minutes ago was suddenly rendered completely speechless, stripped of all his social armor and financial leverage in the blink of an eye. The officers arrived a few minutes ago. Dr. Bennett finished taking a deliberate step to the side and pulling the privacy curtain completely open. They are waiting right outside in the hallway, and they are very eager to speak with both of you regarding exactly how your daughter fell. The heavy privacy curtain slid all the way back, the metal rings scraping loudly against the overhead track and revealing the bustling hospital corridor. Stepping into the trauma bay was a tall, broad-shouldered man wearing a rumpled tan trench coat over a standard-issue police uniform. He carried a small black notepad in one hand and a silver pen in the other. A silver badge clipped to his belt identified him as Detective Miller. The transition from my father's absolute aggressive panic to a masterful, terrifying performance happened in the span of a single heartbeat. Before Detective Miller could even fully step into the room or introduce himself to the medical staff, my mother launched her offensive. Catherine let out a sudden, piercing wail that sounded entirely genuine, a flawless, sickening imitation of a mother pushed to the absolute brink of emotional collapse. She buried her face in her manicured hands, her shoulders shaking violently as she practically collapsed against my father's chest. My father immediately wrapped his arms around her, adopting the posture of a weary, heartbroken protector. He looked up at the detective with an expression of profound sorrow, shaking his head slowly, as if carrying the weight of the world on his tailored shoulders. I watched in paralyzed horror as the two people who had just threatened to render me homeless seamlessly transformed into the ultimate tragic victims. "Officer, please excuse my wife," my father said, his voice thick with fake, heavy emotion, completely abandoning the aggressive, demanding tone he had used with Dr. Bennett just moments earlier. "This has been an absolute nightmare for our family. We are just so incredibly exhausted, and seeing our oldest daughter lying here like this, it is completely breaking our hearts." Detective Miller paused, his pen hovering over his notepad. He glanced at Dr. Bennett, who was watching the scene with narrowed eyes, and then looked down at my mother, whose muffled theatrical sobs were completely filling the small trauma room. "Mr. Wilson, I understand this is a highly stressful situation," the detective said, his voice carrying a professional, calming cadence. "I am Detective Miller. The attending physician expressed some serious concerns about the specific nature of your daughter's injuries. I need to ask a few questions about what exactly happened at your residence this afternoon." My mother pulled her face away from my father's suit jacket. Her eyes were perfectly rimmed with tears, her expensive mascara carefully smudged to convey absolute devastation without looking overly grotesque. "It is all our fault, Detective," she wept, her voice trembling with brilliantly manufactured guilt. "We should have seen the warning signs. We should have known she was spiraling downward again. We just desperately wanted to believe she was finally getting better." I tried to push myself up on my good left elbow to defend myself, a sharp, ragged gasp tearing from my dry throat as my broken ribs violently protested the sudden movement. "Do not listen to them," I rasped, my voice sounding incredibly weak and fragile compared to my mother's booming theatrical wails. "Chelsea pushed me. Chelsea attacked me. They are lying right now to protect her." My father closed his eyes and let out a long, shuddering sigh, the very picture of a defeated, loving parent dealing with an impossible, unruly child. "Abigail, sweetheart, please stop doing this," he pleaded, turning a look of absolute pitying sorrow toward me. He then looked back at the detective, leaning in slightly, as if sharing a deeply painful, shameful family secret. "Detective Miller, I am deeply sorry for wasting your valuable time and hospital resources today. My oldest daughter, Abigail, has a very long, very tragic history of severe psychiatric instability and intentional self-harm." My heart slammed against my ribs so hard I thought my chest would literally crack open. I stared at him, my mouth completely dry, utterly incapacitated by the sheer, breathtaking magnitude of his premeditated lie. "What are you talking about?" I managed to choke out the heart monitor beside my bed, picking up my suddenly racing pulse. No, I do not. He is lying. Check my medical records right now. We have always kept it strictly private. My mother interjected smoothly, delicately, wiping a fake tear from her cheek with the back of her hand. We always try to handle her severe episodes quietly at home, to protect her privacy and her professional reputation. She has always been a deeply troubled girl, prone to massive violent outbursts and terrible, highly detailed, fabricated stories whenever she feels she is not the absolute center of attention. Detective Miller frowned, his professional gaze shifting back and forth between my weeping mother, my somber father, and my battered, immobilized body on the medical gurney. Self-harm. The detective repeated, his pen finally touching the paper of his notepad. Are you saying she deliberately threw herself down the stairs? She did. My mother sobbed loudly, clutching my father's lapel as if she might faint from the sheer tragedy of it all. It absolutely breaks a mother's heart to say it out loud, but she did it on purpose. Her younger sister Chelsea is getting married in exactly 2 weeks. It is supposed to be the happiest time of our entire lives. But Abigail has always harbored a deeply unnatural, disturbing obsession with Chelsea's wealthy fiancé, Ryan. She has been secretly, desperately in love with him for years. The bright fluorescent lights of the trauma room started to spin lazily above me. The strong pain medication coursing through my intravenous line was making my thoughts sluggish and fuzzy around the edges, making it incredibly difficult to defend myself against their rapid-fire, flawlessly coordinated verbal assault. I barely even know Ryan. I protested, my voice sounding incredibly small and completely unconvincing even to my own ears. I have spoken to him maybe 3 times in my entire life. Mom, please stop it. Stop lying to the police. My father completely ignored my pleas, stepping closer to the detective and speaking in a hushed, urgent, conspiratorial tone. She is terribly violently jealous, detective. She simply cannot handle the fact that Chelsea is moving on and building a beautiful, successful life. All week long, Abigail has been making wild, unpredictable threats, actively trying to sabotage the wedding preparations. Today, Chelsea simply asked to borrow a vintage family necklace for her final dress fitting. Abigail completely snapped. She screamed that if she could not have Ryan, Chelsea would not have a wedding at all. Before Chelsea could even react or try to calm her down, Abigail deliberately threw herself backward down the main hardwood staircase. My mother buried her face in her hands again, her shoulders heaving with fake sobs. She looked right at Chelsea and smiled right before she fell. My mother wailed into her palms. She wants to frame her own sister for assault just to stop the wedding from happening. She wants to completely ruin Chelsea's life because she is so sick and unhappy with her own. I looked desperately at Dr. Bennett, fiercely hoping the medical professional who had just defended me with cold, hard facts would immediately see through their flawless, sickening charade. But Dr. Bennett was no longer looking at my parents with pure, unyielding condemnation. He was looking down at me with a careful medical analytical detachment, clearly weighing the disturbing possibility of a severe psychiatric episode against the physical evidence he had just presented. Spiral fractures could, in extremely rare catastrophic instances of severe self-harm, be self-inflicted if a highly disturbed patient forcefully threw themselves down a flight of stairs while their arm was intentionally trapped inside a heavy wooden banister. The old, improperly healed rib fractures from 10 years ago could suddenly be reinterpreted by a medical professional, not as parental neglect, but as a previous highly secretive, undocumented suicide attempt that the family had quietly managed at home. My parents were brilliantly, mercilessly weaponizing my very real, very painful injuries to paint a vivid picture of a deeply disturbed, dangerous woman. I did not throw myself down the stairs. I cried out the profound frustration and absolute betrayal, bringing hot, stinging tears to my eyes. She ripped the necklace right off my neck. Check my neck. There have to be marks from the chain breaking. Detective Miller stepped closer to the side of the gurney. He pulled a small silver penlight from his trenchcoat pocket and clicked it on, shining the bright, focused beam directly across my pale collarbone. I knew there had to be red, angry scratches where the heavy gold chain had violently snapped against my delicate skin. But as the detective carefully inspected my neck, his deep frown only deepened further. "There is some very mild redness here," Detective Miller noted slowly, his voice completely losing the sharp, authoritative edge of a criminal investigator and adopting the careful, gentle, placating tone people exclusively use when speaking to someone who is actively experiencing a mental health crisis. But there are no clear lacerations, no deep scratches, and absolutely no bruising, consistent with a violent physical struggle over a piece of jewelry. Chelsea had been wearing thick, padded winter driving gloves when she grabbed me, having just come inside from the freezing driveway. The heavy gold necklace had snapped quickly under her forceful pull, leaving only a faint red line that was already rapidly fading under the harsh, bright hospital lights. My one piece of physical evidence was practically non-existent. "She is actively experiencing a severe psychotic break," Detective, my father said softly, stepping up to stand right beside the police officer. He looked down at me with an expression of such profound, manufactured pity that I wanted to scream until my lungs bled. "She truly believes her own dangerous delusions. It is a textbook psychological defense mechanism. She simply cannot cope with the horrific reality of what she has just done to her own body, so her sick mind invents a fictional scenario where she is the helpless victim of an attack. We are completely at our wits' end. We just want to get her the intense psychiatric help she so desperately needs right now." Detective Miller clicked his silver pen light off and slowly slipped it back into his pocket. He looked at my father, then at my sobbing mother, and finally down at me. The skepticism in his dark eyes was absolute and crushing. He was no longer looking at a victim of a violent domestic assault. He was looking at a jealous, unhinged, deeply pathetic spinster who had severely injured herself in a desperate, insane bid to ruin her younger sister's fairy tale wedding. "Miss Wilson." Detective Miller said, his tone entirely devoid of the warmth or urgent concern he had walked into the room with. "Can you tell me exactly what happened leading up to the fall? Take your time. We want to make sure we get the full story down on paper." The way he spoke to me, slow and overly enunciated like a kindergarten teacher soothing a toddler, confirmed my absolute worst fears. My parents had won the room. In less than 5 minutes, they had completely rewritten reality. They had transformed a brutal, unprovoked physical attack into a tragic, believable tale of severe mental illness, perfectly casting themselves as the exhausted, heartbroken, loving caretakers of a deeply unstable daughter. I was trapped in a broken body, heavily medicated, completely isolated, and staring down a police officer who was fully prepared to recommend a mandatory psychiatric hold instead of writing a criminal arrest warrant. I forced myself to take a deep, stabilizing breath, fighting against the heavy chemical weight of the pain medication, dragging my thoughts down into a hazy, disorienting fog. I could not let this happen. I could not let my parents successfully paint me as a psychiatric patient to cover up a violent felony committed by their favorite child. I looked past my father's perfectly practiced mask of profound sorrow and locked eyes directly with Detective Miller. I needed him to see the complete, unwavering lucidity in my gaze. I needed him to firmly understand that I was the only person in this sterile hospital room telling the absolute truth. "Detective Miller," I said, keeping my voice as steady and reasonable as humanly possible, despite the searing agony radiating from my shattered arm and pulsing through my chest. "I am not experiencing a mental health crisis today. I am not suffering from delusions, and I have absolutely no romantic interest in my sister's fiancé whatsoever. My parents are lying to your face right now to protect Chelsea from going to state prison 2 weeks before her high society wedding. But you do not have to just take my word for it. I have physical, indisputable proof of everything I am saying." Detective Miller paused, his silver pen hovering just above the yellow-lined paper of his small notepad. My father stiffened instantly, his posture growing incredibly rigid beneath his expensive navy suit as his dark eyes locked onto my face with a terrifying silent warning. My mother let out another dramatic wavering sob, burying her face much deeper into her manicured hands, but I could clearly see her dark eyes darting nervously toward me through the gaps in her fingers, terrified that her flawless narrative was about to collapse. Chelsea texted me incredibly aggressive threats all morning. I continued physically pushing through the sharp, stabbing pain in my rib cage with every single word I forced myself to speak. She sent me well over a dozen messages starting at 6 o'clock this morning. She explicitly demanded that I give her our grandmother's heirloom sapphire necklace so she could wear it with her custom designer wedding dress. When I politely refused her demands and gently reminded her that the necklace was specifically willed to me by my grandmother, she became incredibly unhinged. Her text messages escalated rapidly into direct, violent physical threats against my person. She explicitly texted me that she was coming over to my house to take the heirloom necklace by force, whether I liked it or not. The digital proof of her premeditated malicious intent is sitting right there inside my bag. I nodded my head slowly toward the small, rolling metal tray table pushed against the far wall of the trauma bay. Resting quietly on the bottom metal shelf was my everyday brown leather tote bag. One of the emergency medical technicians must have grabbed it from the hardwood foyer floor and tossed it into the back of the rushing ambulance during the chaotic, frantic rush to transport me to the emergency room. Detective Miller slowly lowered his yellow notepad. He looked thoughtfully at my parents, who were now standing suspiciously, unnaturally silent, and then walked deliberately over to the metal tray table. He picked up the heavy brown leather tote bag by its thick straps and brought it over to the side of my medical gurney. He held it out toward me, his expression a careful, measured mixture of professional law enforcement obligation and a lingering, heavy doubt planted by my parents. If you possess threatening text messages from your sister, Miss Wilson, I absolutely need to see them right now, the detective stated clearly, his tone leaving no room for argument. Where exactly is your mobile phone located? It should be safely secured in the main interior zipper compartment, I replied confidently, my good left hand reaching out eagerly to grasp the familiar worn leather material of the bag, along with my leather wallet and my heavy ring of house keys. Just unzip the top compartment and you will find it right there. Because my right arm was entirely immobilized in the heavy padded medical splint, I awkwardly wedged the bottom edge of the leather bag against my uninjured hip to steady it against my body. I grasped the small, cool brass zipper pull with my left fingers and pulled it open smoothly. The deep interior of the bag was dark, and I reached my hand inside quickly, fully expecting to immediately feel the smooth, cool glass screen of my smartphone and the familiar, bulky, comforting shape of my thick leather wallet. Instead, my searching fingers brushed against something entirely wrong, something that made my heart stutter in my chest. The soft patterned fabric lining of the tote bag felt strange, incredibly loose, and completely shredded into ribbons. A sudden icy chill washed over my entire body, temporarily freezing the burning pain in my shattered shoulder. I pushed my hand much deeper into the main compartment frantically, desperately feeling around the dark, empty space. My fingertips touched the bottom leather seam of the bag, but they found absolutely nothing else. The large tote bag was completely, utterly empty. Panic, cold and incredibly sharp, began to physically claw its way up my dry throat. I grabbed the sides of the heavy leather tote and pulled them wide open, tilting the bag toward the harsh fluorescent hospital lights overhead, so both the detective and I could clearly see the interior space. The beautiful custom fabric lining had been violently slashed open by a sharp blade. Long, jagged, destructive tears ran wildly across the delicate material, completely destroying the interior security pockets, where I always kept my most valuable items. My smartphone was completely gone. My thick leather wallet containing my driver's license, my various credit cards, and my vital medical insurance information was completely missing. My heavy metal ring of house keys had simply vanished into thin air. I stared blankly at the slashed, empty void inside my favorite bag, my analytical mind racing a million miles an hour as the horrific, chilling realizations slowly began to dawn on me. The hazy memory of the immediate aftermath of the brutal fall flashed vividly and violently behind my closed eyes. I vividly remembered lying helplessly at the bottom of the hardwood stairs, completely incapacitated by the blinding, agonizing pain in my shattered arm and my broken ribs. I remembered hearing the deafening, terrifying wail of the ambulance sirens rapidly approaching the front of the house. I remembered the emergency medical technicians rushing through the grand front doors, carefully and urgently loading my broken body onto the medical stretcher and quickly rolling me out into the freezing winter air to the waiting vehicle. But Chelsea had not followed me outside into the driveway. My parents had rushed out into the cold, frantically shouting various instructions at the busy paramedics, but my younger sister had stayed quietly behind in the massive foyer. At the time, looking through a haze of extreme pain, I had foolishly assumed she was simply frozen in pure shock, completely paralyzed by the horrific, violent reality of what she had just done to my body. But she was not in shock at all. She was completely terrifyingly calculating, operating with the cold efficiency of a seasoned criminal. She took them. I whispered, my voice trembling uncontrollably with a sickening mixture of absolute horror and profound realization. I looked up at Detective Miller, my eyes wide and frantic with sudden panic. Chelsea did not stay behind at the house because she was emotionally upset about my injuries. She stayed behind deliberately to steal my personal belongings. She intentionally slashed the inside of my bag and took my smartphone so she could manually delete the threatening text messages she sent me this morning. She completely destroyed the only physical evidence of her premeditated violent attack. My mother let out another loud, incredibly theatrical gasp, clutching her manicured hands tightly to her chest. "Oh, Abigail, please listen to yourself," she cried out, her voice echoing shrilly and pathetically in the small, confined room. "Listen to the wild, paranoid delusions you are spinning right now out of thin air." Chelsea was weeping hysterically on the foyer floor when the ambulance took you away. She was entirely inconsolable because she truly thought you had fatally injured yourself in your terrible sick state of mind. She would never ever touch your private things. I ignored my mother completely, focusing all of my desperate, waning energy entirely on the police detective standing right beside my bed. She took my house keys too. I continued the terrifying absolute scope of Chelsea's malicious plan, becoming terrifyingly clear by the second. "Detective, I am the sole legal owner of that massive estate. My parents do not have their own keys to the property. Chelsea took my keys so she could physically lock me out of my own home while I was trapped here injured in the hospital. But more importantly, she took my smartphone and my keys so she could gain uninterrupted access to the localized home security hub currently sitting in my living room cabinet." Detective Miller frowned deeply, his rigid posture shifting slightly as he actively listened to my rapid, frantic explanation. "What home security hub, Miss Wilson?" he asked, his tone still highly cautious, but finally carrying a tiny faint hint of genuine investigative curiosity. "I have a comprehensive high-definition security camera system installed throughout the entire first floor of the house." I explained, the words tumbling out of my mouth in a desperate, urgent rush. "There is a camera pointed directly at the main hardwood staircase where I fell. It would have easily captured the entire violent assault on crystal-clear video, but the system is routed directly to a localized physical hard drive hidden in the living room cabinet, and it is controlled exclusively through a highly encrypted application on my stolen smartphone." Chelsea knew exactly where the hidden cameras were located. She knew I caught her entire brutal attack on tape. She deliberately stole my phone so she could quickly bypass the application's security access, the physical hard drive, and completely erase the local storage of the video footage before the police could ever secure a search warrant to view it. My father stepped smoothly forward, gently placing a warm, comforting hand directly onto the detective's broad shoulder. He looked down at me with an expression of pure, unadulterated tragedy, his eyes swimming with fake, sorrowful tears. "You see exactly what we are dealing with here, detective. my father said, his voice a low, incredibly mournful rumble that filled the room. She misplaces her personal belongings in the chaotic, frantic rush to the emergency room, and her sick, heavily paranoid mind instantly constructs a massive, malicious conspiracy theory where her own loving sister is a calculating criminal mastermind. It is textbook severe paranoia. She is completely disconnected from our shared reality. We simply cannot safely manage her severe delusions on our own anymore. Detective Miller looked down silently at the slashed, empty leather bag still resting in his hands, then slowly looked back at my battered, desperate face. The tiny, fragile spark of investigative curiosity in his dark eyes had completely vanished instantly, replaced by the overwhelming, undeniable weight of my parents' flawless, highly coordinated lie. Without a smartphone to officially prove the threatening text messages, without a leather wallet to formally prove my identity, and without the localized security footage to undeniably prove the physical assault, I had absolutely nothing to offer but the frantic, terrifying ramblings of a woman whose own parents were actively begging the authorities for a psychiatric intervention. Detective Miller gently took the leather bag from my trembling left hand and set it back down on the metal tray table, slowly turning his back on me to address my deeply concerned father. Detective Miller lowered his voice, offering my father a look of profound man-to-man sympathy that made my stomach violently churn. "I will step out into the hallway and speak privately with Dr. Bennett about the best course of action regarding her psychiatric evaluation." The detective murmured, his tone respectful and hushed. Given the complete lack of physical evidence, her missing identification, and her highly erratic behavior, I am inclined to agree that this is a medical emergency rather than a criminal matter. We will hold off on filing any formal assault charges. You and your wife just sit tight. I will go make a few phone calls and see what we can arrange with the hospital social worker. My father nodded solemnly, extending his right hand again. This time the detective shook it firmly. "Thank you, Detective Miller," my father replied, projecting deep fatherly exhaustion. "We just want our daughter to be safe from herself." The detective gave my mother a final pitying nod, turned on his heel, and pushed through the heavy privacy curtain. The heavy fabric swished shut behind him, sealing the three of us inside the tiny, sterile trauma bay. The very second the curtain settled into place, the stifling, tragic atmosphere in the room evaporated entirely. It was exactly like flipping a light switch. My mother immediately dropped her manicured hands from her tear-stained face. She reached into her expensive leather handbag, pulled out a silver compact mirror, and began clinically checking her mascara for smudges. Her chest completely stopped heaving. Her tragic, trembling lower lip flattened out into a thin, deeply annoyed line. My father rolled his broad shoulders forcefully, stretching the tension out of his neck, and let out a short, harsh breath of pure annoyance. He turned around to face me, and the heartbroken, weary parent was completely gone. The ruthless, calculating corporate shark had returned, his dark eyes glittering with cold, unadulterated triumph. I lay completely paralyzed on the medical gurney, my shattered right arm throbbing with a dull, relentless agony that radiated all the way up to my neck. I was entirely trapped. I had absolutely no smartphone to call a lawyer. I had no physical identification to prove who I was to the hospital administration. I had no house keys to return to the estate I legally owned. Chelsea had methodically stripped away every single layer of my autonomy, leaving me completely defenseless against two people who had spent decades mastering the fine art of total manipulation. They had effortlessly outmaneuvered Dr. Bennett and the police detective in a matter of minutes. "You always did have a terrible habit of overplaying your hand, Abigail," my father stated, taking a slow, deliberate step toward the side of my bed. "You honestly thought a busy police detective was going to believe your wild, convoluted story over two upstanding, respected members of the community. You thought you could just walk in here, throw a pathetic tantrum, and ruin your sister's future. You have always been so incredibly selfish." He reached a hand into the interior breast pocket of his tailored navy suit jacket. He did not pull out a cell phone or a wallet. He slowly withdrew a thick, folded stack of papers. The edges of the document were slightly yellowed and worn, indicating it had been stored away for a very long time. He held the document up under the harsh fluorescent lights, his manicured thumb tracing the deep crease in the center of the heavy parchment paper. I stared at the weathered document, a cold knot of absolute dread forming tight in the pit of my stomach. "What is that?" I demanded, my voice barely more than a raspy, painful whisper. "You cannot legally force me to do anything. I am 30 years old. I am an independent adult." My father let out a low, dark chuckle that sent a terrifying shiver cascading down my spine. "That is where you are entirely wrong, my dear," he replied smoothly, unfolding the thick parchment paper with a sharp, crisp snap. "You see, when you were involved in that tragic car accident 10 years ago, the one where you so recklessly drove your mother's sedan into a tree, you were rendered completely unconscious for several days. The memory hit me like a physical blow, the crushing weight of the steering wheel against my chest, the taste of copper in my mouth. Chelsea crying hysterically in the driver's seat, completely uninjured, begging me to take the blame so she would not lose her college scholarships. My parents arriving at the scene, making the split-second decision to drag me over to the driver's side before the police arrived. I had slipped into a brief coma from the severe trauma and internal bleeding. During that terrifying window of complete incapacitation, my parents had needed absolute unchecked authority over my medical decisions. "We needed to make sure your medical care was handled discreetly and quietly." My father continued, his dark eyes locking onto mine with ruthless intensity. "We had our corporate lawyers draft a highly comprehensive, incredibly binding medical power of attorney. You signed it the very day you woke up while you were still heavily medicated and completely disoriented. You signed away your right to make your own medical decisions if you were ever deemed a danger to yourself or incapacitated. You were so incredibly eager to please us back then, so desperate for our forgiveness after ruining Chelsea's graduation week, that you did not even bother to read the fine print." He tapped the bottom of the yellowed page with his index finger. "The beauty of this specific legal document, Abigail, is that we never officially revoked it. We simply tucked it safely away in our home safe, just in case your severe emotional instability ever became a massive liability to this family again. And looking at you right now, babbling wildly about stolen smartphones and hidden security cameras, making violent accusations against your own sister on the eve of her wedding, you are very clearly experiencing a massive, dangerous psychotic break. You cannot do this." I gasped frantically, trying to shift my weight away from him. But the heavy splint holding my shattered arm anchored me firmly to the mattress. "Dr. Bennett will not allow this. He knows exactly what you are doing." "Dr. Bennett is a busy trauma surgeon," my father countered smoothly, slipping the document back into his suit jacket. "He stabilizes physical injuries. He does not handle psychiatric holds." The hospital social worker, however, will be incredibly receptive to a distressed father presenting a valid medical power of attorney and requesting immediate psychiatric intervention for his suicidal daughter. "Since you are clearly a danger to yourself and others, I have just officially reactivated this legal directive." My mother snapped her compact mirror shut and dropped it back into her handbag with a sharp click. She walked over to stand shoulder to shoulder with my father, looking down at me with an expression of pure, unadulterated disdain. "You brought this entirely on yourself, Abigail," she said coldly, dropping the hysterical weeping mother facade. "If you had just signed the simple accident report like we asked, you could be resting comfortably at the estate right now. But you had to push it. You had to aggressively try and deliberately destroy Chelsea's absolutely perfect, incredibly beautiful wedding day. You will sit in the psych ward until Chelsea is safely married." My father did not wait for my response. He simply turned on his heel, his expensive leather shoes clicking sharply against the sterile linoleum as he marched out of the trauma bay to find the hospital administrator. My mother lingered for just a fraction of a second, her cold gaze raking over my immobilized body with a terrifying mixture of triumph and absolute disgust. She adjusted the strap of her designer handbag, offered me a sickeningly sweet, entirely fake smile, and quickly followed my father out into the corridor. The heavy privacy curtain swished shut behind her, sealing me inside a quiet clinical nightmare. I lay completely paralyzed on the medical gurney, my shattered right arm throbbing with a dull, relentless agony that radiated all the way up to my neck. My ribs burned with every shallow breath I took. The thick chemical fog of the intravenous pain medication was dragging my thoughts down into a hazy, disorienting void, making it incredibly difficult to focus. But I knew I could not afford to panic. I could not let the drugs or the physical trauma cloud my judgment. I had to think like the senior forensic data analyst I was. I needed a lifeline, and I needed it immediately. A soft rustle of fabric drew my attention. The privacy curtain was gently pushed aside, and a young night nurse stepped into the small room. Her name tag read, Chloe. She had kind, observant brown eyes and moved with a quiet efficiency as she approached my bed to check my vital signs and inspect the heavy splint encasing my arm. She did not look at me with the same deep suspicion Detective Miller had shown. She simply looked at a severely injured woman. Chloe, I whispered, forcing my voice to remain as steady and reasonable as humanly possible. I am in desperate need of your help. My parents are currently attempting to commit me to the psychiatric ward against my will, using an outdated invalid medical power of attorney. I am not experiencing a mental health crisis. I was violently pushed down a flight of stairs by my sister, and they are trying to silence me to protect her. Nurse Chloe froze, her hand hovering over my intravenous line. She looked at me cautiously, the institutional protocol clearly battling against her basic human empathy. The detective and the attending physician both noted a potential psychiatric evaluation in your chart, Miss Wilson, she replied softly, her tone professional, but laced with genuine hesitation. I am not authorized to interfere with administrative holds. I am not asking you to interfere with the hospital administration, I pleaded, ignoring the sharp spike of pain in my chest as I shifted my weight toward her. I am simply asking for access to a telephone. My sister stole my smartphone from my bag to destroy evidence of her attack. If I am truly suffering from a severe psychotic break, then a single phone call will not change the outcome. But if I am telling the truth, you are the only person standing between me and an illegal forced psychiatric commitment. Please, I just need to call my attorney. Chloe studied my face for a long, agonizing moment. She looked at my steady gaze, the clear, rational desperation in my eyes, and made a silent, incredibly brave decision. She nodded once, a sharp, decisive motion. She stepped out of the trauma bay for less than a minute and returned holding a cordless hospital desk phone. She placed it gently on my chest right next to my uninjured left hand. You have 3 minutes before the orderlies come to prep you for the transfer, Chloe warned quietly, keeping her back to the curtain to shield my actions from the hallway. Make it count. I picked up the heavy plastic receiver with my left hand, my mind racing as I dug through my memory. Years of working in forensic data analysis had trained me to memorize critical strings of numbers. I closed my eyes, visualizing the digital contact card I had created 2 years ago when I secretly bought the family estate out of foreclosure. I carefully punched in the 10-digit direct extension for Evelyn Vance, my personal attorney, and one of the most ruthless legal minds in the city. The line rang twice before her sharp, authoritative voice answered. Evelyn, it is Abigail, I said, speaking rapidly but clearly. I am at the emergency room. My right arm is shattered and my ribs are fractured. Chelsea pushed me down the stairs. My parents have presented a 10-year-old medical power of attorney to the hospital administration, and they are currently authorizing a mandatory 72-hour psychiatric hold to silence me and protect Chelsea's wedding. I have no phone, no identification, and no keys. The silence on the other end of the line was absolute, followed instantly by the sound of a heavy chair scraping aggressively against a hardwood floor. Where exactly are you? Evelyn demanded, her tone dropping into a deadly clinical register that meant she was already moving. Trauma Bay 4, I replied, a wave of profound relief washing over me. I am 10 minutes away, Evelyn stated with absolute authority. Do not sign anything. Do not verbally consent to any medical transfers. I am coming to tear that hospital administration apart. The line went dead. I handed the phone back to Chloe, thanking her with a silent, grateful look. She quickly slipped the device into her scrub pocket, just as the heavy curtain was forcefully pulled back. Two large, muscular orderlies stepped into the room, pushing a specialized transfer bed equipped with heavy medical restraints. Following closely behind them was a middle-aged hospital administrator holding a clipboard flanked by my father, who was wearing an expression of smug, victorious satisfaction. Miss Wilson, the administrator, began in a flat, bureaucratic drone. Based on the documentation provided by your father and the preliminary behavioral concerns noted in your chart, we are transferring you to the secure psychiatric wing for a mandatory evaluation and holding period. I am refusing this transfer, I stated coldly, keeping my left hand clamped tightly to the metal rail of my gurney. I do not consent to a psychiatric hold. You do not have the legal capacity to refuse Abigail, my father sneered, stepping up to the foot of my bed. I am your medical proxy. You are a danger to yourself. The paperwork is already signed and filed. Move her. The orderlies stepped forward, reaching out to grasp the edges of my hospital gown. Before their hands could even make contact with the fabric, a sharp, commanding voice cut through the sterile air like a perfectly aimed scalpel. If either of you lays a single finger on my client, you will both be personally named in a massive federal lawsuit for unlawful detainment, battery, and medical malpractice. Everyone froze. Evelyn Vance stood squarely in the doorway of the trauma bay. She was a striking, formidable woman in her early 50s, wearing a razor-sharp charcoal pantsuit and holding a thick leather briefcase. She did not simply enter the room, she entirely commanded it. Her icy, piercing gaze swept over the orderlies, instantly forcing them to step back from my bed, before locking directly onto the hospital administrator. I am Evelyn Vance, legal counsel for Abigail Wilson, she announced, her voice ringing with absolute, undeniable authority. She unlatched her leather briefcase, pulled out a thick stack of pristine, stapled documents, and thrust them directly into the administrator's chest. You are currently attempting to hold my client against her will, using an obsolete, entirely invalid medical power of attorney. The document you are holding is 10 years old. The documents I have just handed you are the updated, legally binding living will and medical proxy directives executed exactly 2 years ago. My father's smug expression instantly shattered, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated panic. What are you talking about? He demanded, stepping toward Evelyn. That is impossible. I am her father. You are a deeply uneducated liability, Evelyn corrected him without even glancing in his direction. She kept her eyes fixed firmly on the administrator, who was now frantically flipping through the new pages. Page 4, Section 3. Evelyn instructed coldly. You will clearly see a comprehensive, legally notarized revocation clause explicitly voiding all prior powers of attorney, including the fraudulent piece of garbage her father just handed you. My client is a fully sound, independent adult. She retains absolute total control over her own medical decisions. The administrator stopped reading, his face draining of all color. He looked from the document in his hands to the outdated paper on his clipboard, suddenly realizing the massive, catastrophic legal exposure he had almost walked the hospital into. He quickly signaled the orderlies to back away entirely. I apologize, Miss Vance, the administrator stammered nervously. We were simply operating under the assumption that the father's documentation was current. We will immediately halt the transfer and void the psychiatric intake. You will do more than that, Evelyn demanded, stepping up to the side of my gurney. You will process my client's immediate discharge to my direct custody. I am transferring her to a private medical facility where she will not be subjected to blatant family coercion and institutional incompetence. My father was practically vibrating with rage, his hands clenched into tight fists at his sides. You cannot do this, he yelled, his carefully crafted social mask completely disintegrating into an ugly, desperate snarl. She is deeply unwell. She belongs in this hospital. Evelyn finally turned to look at him, her expression radiating absolute clinical disgust. Thomas, if you do not immediately vacate this trauma bay, I will personally drag the police detective back in here and file formal charges against you for presenting fraudulent legal documents to a medical facility. Get out of my sight. My father opened his mouth to scream another threat, but the sheer terrifying reality of Evelyn's legal power finally registered in his dark eyes. He took one last furious look at me, promising absolute retribution in his silent glare, before spinning around and storming out of the room. The discharge process took less than 30 minutes. Evelyn aggressively managed every single detail, refusing to let any hospital staff question me further without her direct supervision. They securely wrapped my shattered arm in a heavy fiberglass cast, provided a strict regimen of oral pain medication, and fitted me with a stabilizing sling. I was exhausted, aching, and physically battered, but as Evelyn guided my wheelchair through the sliding glass doors of the emergency room, I tasted absolute freedom. We navigated through the crowded main lobby, the bright afternoon sunlight streaming through the massive glass windows. Near the revolving exit doors, my parents were standing together in a tight, furious huddle. My mother's face was twisted in an ugly, bitter scowl, entirely devoid of the tragic weeping persona she had played so perfectly for the police. My father was pacing frantically, his hands gesturing wildly as he spoke to her. When they saw Evelyn pushing my wheelchair toward the exit, they both froze, glaring at me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. Evelyn did not break her stride. She pushed my wheelchair directly past them, her posture radiating absolute dominance. "Do not even think about approaching us," Evelyn stated loudly, her voice echoing clearly across the busy lobby. "Any further communication from your family will go directly through my office. Enjoy your wedding preparations." We left them seething in the lobby, stepping out into the cold, crisp winter air. Evelyn helped me carefully into the passenger seat of her sleek black sedan, securing the seatbelt gently over my uninjured shoulder. The heated leather seat offered a small measure of physical comfort against the deep, bone-chilling ache of my fractured ribs, but my mind was already racing miles ahead. "We are going straight to my office downtown," Evelyn said, sliding into the driver's seat and starting the engine. "It is completely secure, and we need to figure out our immediate next steps. You cannot go back to that estate right now. It is entirely compromised." I leaned my head back against the headrest, closing my eyes as the powerful engine purred to life. The physical pain was a constant, sharp reality, but an icy, clinical surge of pure adrenaline was rapidly taking over my system. I knew my parents better than anyone in the world. I knew their incredible capacity for vindictive, calculated cruelty. If my father had confidently walked into that hospital armed with an old, obscure legal document, he was not just trying to silence me. He was actively making a massive, coordinated play for total control. "Evelyn, I need access to a highly secure computer." "The absolute second we arrive," I said, keeping my voice incredibly steady, despite the sharp throb in my chest. They took my smartphone and my wallet. "I need to immediately log into my banking portals and transfer my liquid emergency funds to an entirely new unlisted account. I also need you to contact the private investigator your firm uses. We need to track Chelsea's movements immediately." Evelyn merged the sedan onto the busy highway, her eyes focused sharply on the road ahead. "I will have a laptop waiting on my desk. We will lock everything down tight." The drive to the financial district felt agonizingly slow. Every single bump in the asphalt sent a fresh wave of hot fire radiating through my damaged ribcage, but I forced myself to breathe through the pain, intentionally taking shallow, measured breaths. When we finally pulled into the secure underground parking garage of Evelyn's high-rise office building, the sheer relief of being safely hidden away from my family was palpable. Evelyn guided me onto the private elevator, swiping her security badge to grant us access to the top floor. Her law office was a fortress of polished mahogany, thick, soundproof glass, and absolute discretion. The receptionist was already gone for the day, leaving the expansive suite completely quiet and deeply peaceful. Evelyn led me directly into her massive corner office, easing me into a plush leather chair in front of her massive, immaculate desk. She quickly powered up a sleek silver laptop, entering a complex series of security passwords before sliding the device across the smooth wooden surface toward my uninjured left hand. "Go ahead," Evelyn instructed, taking a seat behind her desk and pulling out a fresh legal pad. "I am contacting the private investigator right now." I awkwardly positioned the laptop using my left hand to carefully type in the web address for my primary banking institution. My fingers were slightly clumsy, unaccustomed to doing all the work, but sheer determination guided my keystrokes. I entered my secure username and my highly complex alphanumeric password. The screen shifted to a multi-factor authentication page. Without my stolen smartphone to receive a security code, I was forced to navigate through a lengthy, tedious series of secret security questions. I typed the answers methodically, my pulse quickening with a creeping, undeniable sense of dread. My father was a deeply terrifying man when cornered. He had spent his entire life moving vast sums of money through complex corporate structures. He understood banking protocols better than anyone I knew. The digital loading wheel spun endlessly on the bright screen. I held my breath waiting for the familiar, comforting dashboard displaying my various accounts to appear. I had spent years meticulously saving my money, living incredibly frugally even while carrying the massive financial burden of the family estate. I had built a substantial, highly secure emergency fund, specifically designed to protect myself from the exact kind of catastrophic disaster my family constantly generated. The web page finally loaded. The bright white screen illuminated my face. I stared at the numbers displayed in large, bold black font, my brain completely refusing to process the information correctly. I blinked hard, shaking my head to clear the lingering effects of the hospital medication, and looked again. The primary checking account balance was zero. I quickly clicked the small digital tab to view my high-yield savings account, the secure vault where I kept my critical safety net. The screen refreshed. The savings account balance was zero. Over $120,000, the entire sum of my hard-earned life savings, was completely, utterly gone. Evelyn. I whispered, my voice sounding completely hollow and detached from my body. It is gone. All of it is gone. Evelyn immediately dropped her pen and stood up, walking swiftly around the large mahogany desk to stand directly behind my chair. She leaned down, her sharp eyes scanning the digital numbers on the glowing screen. Her posture instantly turned rigid. "Click on the transaction history," Abigail. Evelyn ordered, her tone shifting into a cold, dangerous register. "Do it right now." I clicked the link, my left hand trembling violently against the smooth trackpad. The detailed transaction log populated the screen. There, listed at the very top of the page, was a massive outbound wire transfer, initiated exactly 45 minutes ago. Evelyn leaned closer, quickly analyzing the specific digital routing codes attached to the massive transfer. She let out a sharp, incredibly angry breath. "He did not just steal it," she stated, her voice laced with absolute clinical fury. "He wired the entire sum directly into an offshore family trust." I stared blankly at the screen, the horrific, calculated reality of my father's actions crashing down upon me. But how, I asked, the sheer impossibility of the theft breaking my composure. "The bank has strict waiting periods. They require verbal authorization for massive wire transfers. They require physical identification." Evelyn straightened up, her eyes blazing with a terrifying professional wrath. "He used the brief 2-hour window while that old medical power of attorney was actively registered at the hospital. He left your mother to monitor the trauma bay while he drove straight to your local bank branch. He presented the medical directive claiming you were severely incapacitated and actively suicidal. And he utilized a corrupt, long-time corporate contact at that specific branch to entirely bypass the standard security holding periods. He legally seized control of your liquid assets and moved them offshore, officially categorizing the massive theft as a protective measure for an incapacitated dependent." I sat frozen in the plush leather chair, the absolute devastation of the moment washing over me in cold, suffocating waves. They had not just physically broken my body. They had not just locked me out of my own home and stolen my only means of communication. They had completely stripped away my financial independence, leaving me entirely destitute and completely vulnerable. My parents had systematically, ruthlessly dismantled my entire life in a matter of hours, all to protect the golden child who had pushed me down the stairs. The profound, sickening betrayal was absolute, but the deep, agonizing sorrow I expected to feel never arrived. Instead, staring at the empty zeros on the glowing screen, the very last shred of daughterly affection within me withered and died, replaced entirely by a cold, clinical, and absolutely terrifying need for complete destruction. Evelyn shattered the heavy silence by slamming her hands down flat on the edge of the mahogany desk. She let out a sharp, venomous curse that echoed off the thick glass windows. Pacing the length of the room, her heels clicked rhythmically against the polished hardwood floor. She pulled her phone from her jacket pocket, her thumb hovering aggressively over the screen. "I am calling my contacts at the Federal Bureau of Investigation right now," Evelyn declared, her voice ringing with absolute certainty. "This is no longer a civil dispute over a fraudulent proxy. Your father just committed textbook high-level wire fraud. He executed a massive unauthorized transfer across international lines using a fabricated medical pretense. I know an agent in white-collar crime who will absolutely salivate over this case. We will have federal agents knocking on his door by tomorrow morning. They will freeze his entire portfolio and drag him out of that estate in handcuffs." I did not look away from the glowing laptop screen. The sharp throbbing agony in my shattered arm and the burning ache in my fractured ribs were slowly fading into the background, pushed aside by a massive surging wave of pure adrenaline. My analytical mind, the part of me that processed raw data and uncovered hidden patterns for a living, was rapidly shifting into maximum overdrive. I visualized the timeline. I calculated the variables. And I knew exactly how my father had structured this vicious financial attack. "No," I said, my voice cutting through the quiet hum of the office ventilation system with surprising strength. "Put the phone down, Evelyn. We are not calling the federal authorities." Evelyn stopped pacing instantly. She stared at me across the desk, her phone still tightly gripped in her hand, her expression a mixture of profound confusion and deep professional concern. "Abigail, you are currently severely injured, locked out of your own house, and completely destitute. The local police force actively believes you are experiencing a severe psychotic break. You have absolutely no resources left. The federal government is the only entity with the immediate authority and the sheer manpower to compel that bank to reverse an offshore transfer of this magnitude." I slowly turned my chair away from the empty bank accounts, looking directly into Evelyn's eyes. "I need you to listen to me very carefully," I explained, keeping my tone perfectly level and completely devoid of emotion. "I know exactly how federal financial investigations operate. Even if your contact fast-tracks the review, the bureaucratic machinery moves at a glacial pace. They have to file formal complaints. They have to request official subpoenas for the bank records. They have to coordinate with international authorities to even peek at that offshore trust." I paused, taking a shallow, careful breath to keep my broken ribs from expanding too far. "It will take them weeks, if not months, to secure the necessary warrants. My father knows this. He is a seasoned corporate executive who has spent his entire career navigating complex legal gray areas. He is counting on the slow, methodical churn of the traditional justice system. Chelsea's high society wedding is exactly 2 weeks away." I continued, the terrifying clarity of my realization making my heart beat in a slow, steady rhythm. "If we go to the federal authorities today, my parents will simply hire a team of incredibly expensive defense attorneys to stall the investigation. They will claim the transfer was a legitimate protective measure for a mentally unstable daughter. They will tie the whole thing up in endless litigation. And while the agents are busy pushing paperwork across their desks, my father will quietly launder that $120,000 through a dozen different shell companies until it is completely untraceable. Chelsea will have her perfect, lavish wedding. My parents will play the role of the tragic, loving hosts. They will win." Evelyn slowly lowered her phone, her sharp legal mind processing the cold, undeniable truth of my assessment. She walked back to her desk and sat down heavily in her chair, pressing her fingers against her temples. "Then what exactly do you propose we do?" she asked, her voice dropping into a quiet, serious register. "We do not have the liquid capital to hire a private forensic accounting firm to track this money. We do not have the time to file an emergency civil injunction before the funds are dispersed. If we do not use the authorities, how do we possibly fight back against a man with bottomless resources and a 2-hour head start? I looked down at my left hand, testing the dexterity of my fingers. I did not need a private forensic accounting firm. My parents had spent my entire adult life looking down their noses at my career. They constantly mocked my profession at family dinners, telling their wealthy friends that I was just a glorified data entry clerk, a boring number cruncher who sat in a cubicle all day staring at spreadsheets. They willfully ignored the actual title printed on my office door. I am a senior medical billing auditor. I stated clearly, letting the heavy weight of the words fill the quiet room. Evelyn, I do not just crunch numbers for a hospital. My entire career revolves around tracing hidden digital assets, untangling massive webs of financial deceit, and uncovering sophisticated fraud. I spend 40 hours a week hunting down phantom billing operations, ghost clinics, and corporate embezzlement schemes for one of the largest healthcare networks in the country. Evelyn watched me, her eyes widening slightly as the profound realization began to dawn on her. My father thinks he is completely untraceable because he moved the money offshore. I continued, a cold, sharp smile touching the corners of my mouth. But he is arrogant. He operates under the assumption that he is the smartest person in any given room. He used a corrupt local contact to force that wire transfer through the system in less than 2 hours. That means he was incredibly sloppy. He had to bypass the standard encryption protocols and leave digital fingerprints all over the routing numbers. He did not build a new invisible pipeline to move my money. He used an existing corporate backdoor that he already established for his own offshore tax shelters. I know exactly how men like him think because I catch men exactly like him every single day. I leaned forward slightly, ignoring the searing pain in my shoulder. I do not need a federal subpoena to find my money. I just need a digital thread to pull. I am going to tear his entire financial network apart from the inside out. I am going to find the exact offshore account where he parked my savings, and I am going to quietly strip away every single layer of protection he thinks he has. I am going to ruin him, and I am going to do it before Chelsea even walks down the aisle. I need instant surgical retaliation. Evelyn stared at me for a long moment. She did not see a victim anymore. She saw a predator waking up. Evelyn let out a slow, deeply impressed breath and tossed her cell phone onto the desk. "What exactly do you need?" she asked. "I need a fresh, completely clean laptop that is entirely disconnected from your law firm network," I replied, my mind already organizing the massive sequence of tracking algorithms I was about to deploy. And black coffee. Evelyn did not ask a single question. She gave me a long, piercing look that conveyed a profound level of professional respect, then turned and strode out of the office, her heels clicking sharply against the hardwood floor. I sat alone in the quiet, expansive room, the adrenaline continuing to course through my veins, acting as a powerful temporary shield against the agonizing throbbing in my shattered right arm and the tight burning ache in my fractured ribs. I closed my eyes and began mentally mapping out the exact digital architecture I was about to navigate. I had spent years analyzing the fraudulent behaviors of desperate people trying to hide massive sums of money. I knew their patterns. I knew their blind spots. I knew that my father, despite his towering arrogance and lifelong corporate experience, was fundamentally operating on outdated assumptions about digital security. He thought like a man who used checkbooks and wire transfer forms. I thought like a woman who hunted phantoms in the cloud. Less than 5 minutes later, Evelyn returned. She carried a sleek, heavy, shrink-wrapped box containing a brand-new laptop, clearly pulled straight from the firm's emergency IT reserves, and a large, steaming ceramic mug of pitch-black coffee. She set the mug down next to my left hand, broke the seal on the box with a silver letter opener, and placed the pristine machine directly in front of me. She did not offer to type for me. She instinctively understood that I needed to do this myself. I popped the lid open with my uninjured hand, ignoring the sharp pull in my chest as I leaned forward. The machine booted up instantly. I connected to the firm's isolated guest network, immediately launching a heavily encrypted virtual private network to mask my location and secure my data stream. My biggest immediate hurdle was my stolen smartphone. Every single secure portal I needed to access required two-factor authentication, which meant the systems would automatically attempt to send a verification code to the phone Chelsea was currently holding. But my family had completely underestimated the sheer depth of my professional paranoia. As a senior auditor dealing with highly sensitive medical data and multi-million-dollar financial discrepancies, I frequently had to conduct emergency remote audits from various locations across the country. I had long ago anticipated the possibility of losing a physical device. I navigated to the secure back-end employee portal of the national healthcare network I worked for. I bypassed the standard login screen, entirely accessing a hidden directory meant strictly for elite IT security personnel. The screen prompted me for an authentication token. I clicked a small icon in the corner, activating the laptop's high-definition webcam. I stared directly into the lens, holding my face perfectly still, despite the pain radiating through my shoulder. The biometric software scanned my retinal pattern, cross-referencing it against the encrypted profiles stored deep within the hospital network's secure servers. A moment later, a small green checkmark appeared. The system then prompted me for a vocal authorization. I cleared my throat, took a shallow, painful breath, and recited a seemingly random 12-word phrase I had memorized 3 years ago. The vocal recognition software instantly verified my cadence, pitch, and tone. The screen flashed, and I was granted direct access to my personal, highly encrypted digital vault. This was my true safety net, a secure repository completely separate from any public banking institution. Inside, I retrieved a series of dynamic, continuously rotating digital authentication tokens. I was officially back in the system, entirely bypassing the need for my stolen cellular device. Evelyn stood silently behind my chair, sipping her own coffee, watching the rapid, complex sequence of events unfold on the screen with a mixture of quiet awe and predatory anticipation. Now that I had my digital keys, I bypassed my local bank entirely. I did not care about the empty savings account anymore. I needed to see the complete, unvarnished picture of my entire financial identity. I navigated directly to the master portal of the 3 major credit reporting bureaus. I utilized my security clearance to run a comprehensive deep-level hard inquiry on my own social security number, bypassing the consumer-facing dashboards to look at the raw, unfiltered data streaming straight from the financial institutions. The report loaded line by line, filling the bright screen with dense blocks of text and numbers. I stared at the summary section, a cold, sickening realization slowly creeping up the back of my neck. My pristine, immaculately maintained credit score, a number I had protected with relentless discipline, had absolutely plummeted. I scrolled down past my standard low-balance credit card and my perfectly paid mortgage history. There, sitting like ugly, cancerous growths on my permanent financial record, were 3 massive, newly established lines of credit. I clicked on the first account, expanding the details. It was a platinum-tier corporate signature loan opened exactly 4 months ago, carrying an astronomical limit. The current balance was entirely maxed out at $65,000. I clicked on the second account. It was a high-limit luxury travel and expense card opened 3 months ago, carrying a balance of $40,000. The third was a specialty vendor credit line opened just 6 weeks ago, carrying a balance of $45,000. My parents had not just waited for a convenient medical emergency to steal my life savings. They had been actively, methodically impersonating me for months. They had forged my signature, utilized my social security number, and leveraged my flawless financial history to quietly borrow $150,000 of unsecured debt under my name. The sheer, breathtaking scale of their betrayal was staggering. They had not just stolen my past. They had actively mortgaged my future, knowing full well that when the creditors eventually came calling, I would be left completely ruined and entirely responsible for the catastrophic debt. What am I looking at? Abigail. Evelyn asked, her voice dangerously quiet as she leaned over my shoulder to read the glowing numbers. You are looking at identity theft on a massive coordinated scale, I replied, my voice stripped of all emotion, sounding like a machine processing data. But people like my father do not steal this kind of money just to let it sit in a bank account. He is a corporate shark. He moves capital to fund operations. I just need to see exactly where this money went. I ran a quick script utilizing my auditing software to pull the merchant identification codes attached to the outbound transactions from those fraudulent accounts. The data populated instantly, translating the sterile banking codes into specific business names. I read the list aloud, the horrifying truth clicking into place with perfect, sickening clarity. La Petite Rose Bridal Couture in Paris, the Oakmont Valley Country Club, Prestige Event Catering, Elite Floral Designs, the Sapphire Vault Jewelers. I stopped reading and leaned back against the plush leather chair. I stared at the screen, putting all the jagged, disconnected pieces together. The endless, extravagant boasting my mother had done over the past 6 months. The incredible, over-the-top luxury of Chelsea's upcoming wedding. The massive custom-designed engagement ring from Ryan. It was all a complete, meticulously crafted illusion. Evelyn, I said, my voice barely a whisper. The wedding. The entire $150,000 high society spectacle. My parents did not pay for it. They stole my identity to fund it. Evelyn frowned, her sharp legal mind immediately searching for the underlying motive. But why, she asked, pacing a few steps away from the desk. Your father is the executive vice president of a major logistics firm. Your parents own a massive estate. They have always flaunted their wealth. Why would a man with his portfolio risk 20 years in federal prison for identity theft just to pay for a party? Because he does not have a portfolio anymore, I answered, my fingers flying across the keyboard as a new, incredibly dark theory formed in my mind. I opened a new tab and accessed the state corporate registry, a database I used daily to verify the legitimacy of medical clinics. I typed in the name of my father's logistics firm. The primary company profile loaded, looking perfectly normal to a casual observer. But I was not a casual observer. I pulled up the secondary filings tracing the corporate officers and looking for recent structural changes. The data revealed a massive, frantic restructuring effort that had occurred late last year. I did not stop there. I jumped over to the federal bankruptcy docket, searching his specific corporate tax identification numbers and cross-referencing them with his personal holdings. The search engine chugged for a few seconds before returning a massive sealed document file. I broke through the basic privacy filters and opened the summary page. 14 months ago, my father's logistics empire had suffered a catastrophic, unrecoverable collapse. A massive international supply chain failure combined with incredibly reckless over-leveraging had completely wiped out his entire company. The corporate bankruptcy filing was absolute, but the documents revealed something far worse. In a desperate, arrogant attempt to save his failing business, my father had personally guaranteed the corporate loans using his own private assets as collateral. I scrolled through the brutal, unyielding financial disclosures. The family estate, the cars, the investment portfolios, it was all gone. Everything they owned was currently leveraged to the hilt, secretly mortgaged to predatory private lenders, to keep up the appearance of extreme wealth while they quietly drowned in insurmountable debt. They were completely, utterly broke. I looked up at Evelyn, who was staring at the screen with a look of profound, dawning horror. They are insolvent. I explained the reality of my family's sheer sociopathy, making my skin run cold. My father lost everything over a year ago. They have been running a desperate, high-stakes con game ever since. They could not afford to downsize or admit defeat because they needed to maintain their social standing. And then Chelsea met Ryan. Evelyn's eyes widened in understanding. Ryan's family, she murmured, piecing it together. The political dynasty, old money, limitless resources. Exactly, I said, nodding slowly. Chelsea marrying into that specific family is their ultimate salvation. If the wedding happens, she becomes a member of an untouchable, incredibly wealthy dynasty. The in-laws would quietly bail my father out to avoid a public scandal, or Chelsea would have access to enough capital to save the estate herself. But Ryan's family expects a certain level of grandeur. They expect my parents to host a lavish 6-figure wedding event that matches their elite social status. My parents did not have the cash to fund the illusion required to get Chelsea down the aisle. So they stole my identity, hijacked my pristine credit score, and took out massive fraudulent loans to pay for the country club, the dress, the catering, and the jewelry. I stared at the screen, the deep burning ache in my ribs momentarily forgotten. And then this morning, Chelsea pushed me down the stairs. I continued, my voice perfectly calm and completely terrifying. I survived, and I told them I was going to call the police. My parents panicked. If I derailed the wedding, their entire house of cards would collapse. They would lose Ryan's family, they would lose the estate, and the private creditors would destroy them. So they decided to lock me in a psychiatric ward to discredit my assault claims. But my father realized that if I was committed, he could legally activate that old medical proxy. He used the 2-hour window to drain my actual physical life savings of $120,000, wiring it offshore, to ensure he had a private, untouchable emergency fund if the whole con eventually fell apart. They sold my entire life, my freedom, and my future just to buy Chelsea a billionaire husband. Evelyn stared at me, her expression hardening into a mask of pure righteous fury. She reached for her desk phone. "This is beyond fraud, Abigail. This is a criminal conspiracy of the highest order. We are going to the FBI right now. I do not care how long it takes. I will personally march into the field office and drop this federal bankruptcy docket on the special agent's desk. We have the proof of the identity theft. We have the wire transfer. We can stop this." "No," I said sharply, my left hand shooting out to press down on the receiver, stopping her from lifting the phone. Evelyn looked at me, her brow furrowed in deep frustration. "Abigail, you cannot handle this internally. This is a massive federal crime." I withdrew my hand, leaning back in the chair. "Evelyn, you are thinking like a lawyer. You are thinking about indictments and court dates and formal charges. I am thinking about tomorrow morning. If we go to the FBI today, the federal bureaucracy takes over. They will launch a quiet, methodical investigation. They will seal the files. My parents will hire a cutthroat defense firm using my stolen money. They will claim the loans were a misunderstanding or that I authorized them during a manic episode. They will drag the investigation out for months. I locked eyes with Evelyn, refusing to blink. And while the federal agents are busy gathering subpoenas, the wedding will happen. Chelsea will marry Ryan. My parents will stand at the country club, sipping expensive champagne, playing the role of the perfect wealthy family. They will smile for the cameras, secure in their new billionaire safety net. And they will spend the next 5 years dragging me through the mud, claiming I am a jealous, mentally unstable daughter, trying to ruin their happiness. I will not let them have that wedding. I will not let them enjoy a single second of their victory. I turned back to the laptop, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. Paper trails and financial documents can be debated in a courtroom. Debt can be restructured. I need the one thing they cannot spin, cannot deny, and cannot hide from. They think I am crazy. They convinced the police detective I was hallucinating. I need to prove unequivocally that Chelsea physically assaulted me. "But Chelsea took your phone," Evelyn reminded me gently, her tone laced with genuine regret. "You said she deliberately stayed behind to wipe the localized physical hard drive in your living room cabinet. The security footage of the attack is completely gone." I let out a slow, dark chuckle that sounded entirely foreign to my own ears. Chelsea is a vapid, incredibly spoiled socialite who thinks deleting an app from a smartphone erases data from existence, I replied, my fingers beginning a rapid, complex sequence of keystrokes. She knew I had a physical hard drive in the living room cabinet because I explicitly told her it was there. I let her see it. I let her believe that the small black box was the only place the camera footage was stored. I navigated to a highly obscure, unlisted URL string. The screen went completely black for a moment, before a stark, minimalist login portal appeared displaying a simple white padlock icon. "But I am a cybersecurity adjacent auditor," I continued, my voice dropping into a cold, lethal whisper. "I spend my life dealing with people who try to destroy evidence. I would never ever rely exclusively on localized physical storage in a house that my hostile family has access to. The hard drive in the living room cabinet was a complete decoy. It was a dummy drive meant to give anyone who broke in a false sense of accomplishment. I typed in a massive 64-character encryption key from memory, my left hand moving with precise, relentless accuracy. The real security camera system is hardwired directly into the fiber optic network of the house. It bypasses the local cabinet entirely. Every single frame of video, every single decibel of audio is instantly mirrored and uploaded in real time to a highly secure, heavily encrypted off-site cloud server farm hosted in Switzerland. Chelsea did not destroy the evidence. She simply destroyed a useless piece of plastic. The screen flashed green. The Swiss server accepted my encryption key. A pristine, highly organized dashboard appeared displaying a grid of camera feeds from my estate. I clicked on the archive folder, navigating to the exact date and time of the assault. The file was large, capturing the event in flawless, high-definition quality. I downloaded the raw video file directly to Evelyn's laptop and hit play. Evelyn stepped around the desk, leaning down to watch the screen over my shoulder. The video buffered for a fraction of a second before springing to life. The angle was perfect, captured from a discrete camera mounted high in the corner of the grand foyer, offering an unobstructed, crystal-clear view of the hardwood staircase and the front doorway. The audio track kicked in incredibly crisp and clear. We watched as Chelsea stormed into the foyer, her face twisted in an ugly, entitled sneer. We listened to her shrill, aggressive demands for our grandmother's heirloom sapphire necklace. We watched my calm, measured refusal. And then we watched the violence unfold with terrifying clarity. Evelyn gasped softly as the high-definition footage showed Chelsea lunging forward like a rabid animal. The camera captured every vicious detail: Chelsea's manicured hands grabbing the delicate gold chain, the violent yank that ripped the heirloom necklace from my throat, leaving angry red marks on my skin, the brutal two-handed shove against my chest, the sickening, horrific visual of my body pitching backward, tumbling helplessly down the long flight of hardwood stairs, the heavy, terrible thud of my impact at the bottom, and the sharp, audible crack of my arm shattering against the floorboards. But the camera did not stop there. It continued to record as I lay completely incapacitated at the bottom of the stairs, groaning in agony. It captured Chelsea walking slowly, methodically down the steps. She did not look horrified. She did not look panicked. She stepped carefully over my broken body, walking directly to the small entryway table where I had dropped my brown leather tote bag. The high-definition lens zoomed in slightly, capturing Chelsea reaching into the bag, pulling out my smartphone and my heavy ring of house keys, and slipping them casually into her designer purse. She then turned around, looking down at my helpless form with a cold, calculating smirk, before walking out the front door, just as the distant wail of the ambulance sirens began to echo in the background. The video ended, freezing on the final frame of Chelsea's malicious, triumphant smile. The silence in Evelyn's office was absolute, broken only by the ragged sound of my own breathing. Evelyn stood completely still, staring at the frozen image on the screen, her face pale with shock and outrage. She had been a lawyer for 30 years. She had seen the absolute worst of human behavior. But witnessing the cold, premeditated brutality of a sister leaving her sibling broken on the floor was entirely different than reading a police report. I reached out with my left hand and gently closed the laptop screen. I had the complete financial footprint, proving massive multi-tiered identity theft and corporate fraud. I had the irrefutable high-definition video evidence of aggravated assault, robbery, and malicious intent. I had everything I needed. "Evelyn," I said, looking up at my attorney, the cold, analytical rage within me settling into a state of absolute, perfect clarity. "I want you to draft a formal, incredibly aggressive civil complaint against my parents and my sister. But we are not going to file it yet. We are going to wait. We are going to let them spend the next 2 weeks believing they won. We are going to let them walk into that country club. We are going to let Chelsea put on her custom designer wedding dress. We are going to let them stand in front of Ryan's billionaire family and all their wealthy friends." I leaned back in the chair, a slow, dangerous smile finally breaking across my face. "And then, right in the middle of their perfect, fraudulent, high society wedding, I am going to burn their entire world to the ground." Evelyn looked at the frozen frame of Chelsea's smug face on the screen, then back at me. She closed the silver laptop. I agree with your assessment, Abigail, my attorney stated. If we walk into a federal field office right now, we hand control to a bloated bureaucracy. Your father is a desperate animal operating on borrowed time. If we spook him before the trap is fully set, he will scatter that money across untraceable exchanges, and your sister will still get her fairy tale ending. We need him to believe he executed the perfect crime. I nodded, the dull ache in my shattered arm fading as an icy calm settled over my body. To make him feel secure, I have to completely disappear, I explained. For the next 5 days, I am going totally dark. I will not send a text message or make a phone call. I will not demand the return of my keys or threaten them with legal action. I want my parents to wake up every morning and believe their unstable daughter is hiding in fear. I want them to think their obsolete power of attorney terrified me into submission. Evelyn leaned back, a predatory smile touching the corners of her mouth. The silent treatment is a brilliant, devastating tactic, she murmured. Your father thrives on conflict. He expects you to fight back. When you give him pure silence, his massive ego will fill the void. He will convince himself he has broken your spirit. He will lower his guard, leaving those stolen funds resting in that offshore trust, assuming he has time to launder the money after the wedding dust settles. But we are not giving him that time, I countered. He used a corrupt contact to force that wire transfer through, but the receiving entity is a recognized financial institution. We have the exact routing numbers, account identifiers, and the digital footprint of the unauthorized transaction. I need you to file an expedited civil freeze on that trust. Evelyn was already writing rapidly on her legal pad. I will draft an emergency ex parte motion for a temporary restraining order on those assets, she confirmed. We do not even have to notify your father. Because we possess the security footage of the assault and the digital records proving the unauthorized wire transfer of your savings, I can present this directly to a superior court judge in private chambers. I can argue there is an immediate risk of dissipation. The plan was flawlessly elegant. Over the next 5 days, I isolated myself completely. Evelyn arranged for me to stay in a secure corporate suite across the street from her firm. The accommodations were entirely anonymous, providing a quiet fortress where I could monitor my family's movements without exposing my location. The heavy fiberglass cast encasing my arm was a relentless burden, and my fractured ribs made taking a deep breath feel like swallowing glass. But the physical agony only served to sharpen my focus, fueling the cold rage that kept me moving forward. I purchased a prepaid cellular phone to communicate exclusively with Evelyn, leaving my new secure number unlisted. I became a ghost. The silence from my end was absolute, but my family was incredibly loud. Using the secure laptop, I monitored the digital footprint of my parents and sister. Chelsea was completely unhinged with excitement, posting endless updates on her public profiles about her final wedding dress fittings, luxury floral arrangements, and exclusive country club seating charts. She complained playfully about the stress of being a high society bride, portraying herself as the exhausted center of attention. She had violently assaulted her own sister, stolen a family heirloom, and transitioned back into her shallow reality. My parents were equally brazen. They were utilizing the fraudulent credit lines they had opened in my name, blindly swiping their way through the final expenses of the wedding preparations. I watched the transactions populate on my monitor in real time. $10,000 for imported champagne, $15,000 for a custom lighting package. They were spending my future with entitlement, convinced their financial deception was secure. On the third day of my isolation, the silence began to unnerve my father. He sent a manipulative email to my compromised address, adopting the tone of a deeply concerned parent. He urged me to seek psychiatric help, casually mentioning they had secured my personal belongings for my protection. He ended the message, stating they would always love me despite my mental deterioration. It was a textbook piece of gaslighting, designed to establish a paper trail of parental concern. I read the message once, deleted it, and went back to drinking my black coffee. The trap was now officially set, and I just needed to wait for the steel jaws to snap shut. That confirmation finally arrived precisely on the afternoon of the 5th day. I was sitting at the glass dining table in my corporate suite, awkwardly typing data queries with my left hand, when my prepaid phone buzzed against the tabletop. I answered it immediately, recognizing Evelyn's private office number. "It is done," Evelyn announced, her voice radiating triumphant satisfaction. "I just walked out of the judge's private chambers. He took one look at the security camera footage of your sister shoving you down the stairs, and the corresponding timestamps on the unauthorized offshore wire transfer, and signed the emergency injunction without hesitation. The court order was transmitted to the banking authority." I closed my eyes, an overwhelming wave of relief crashing over me. "The money is locked?" I asked, needing to hear her confirm the exact details. "The money is completely trapped," Evelyn confirmed, her tone turning ruthless. "The family trust is entirely frozen. Your father cannot withdraw a single dime. He cannot transfer the funds to a secondary holding account, and he cannot use the capital as collateral for any loans. The $120,000 he stole from you is legally quarantined until a formal court hearing can be scheduled." A cold, dangerous smile spread slowly across my face. "And the most beautiful part of this specific legal maneuver," I murmured, staring out the large window. "He has no idea it has happened," Evelyn finished for me. "The bank will not notify him of the civil freeze unless he attempts to initiate a transfer or log into the trust's administrative portal. Since he believes you are terrified and totally unaware of the offshore account's existence, he has no reason to check the balance. He thinks his emergency safety net is perfectly secure." We had successfully neutralized his stolen leverage. My father was a broke, desperate man, walking a terrifying financial tightrope, entirely reliant on fraudulent credit and an account he could no longer touch. The elaborate illusion he had built for Ryan's wealthy family was officially running on empty fumes. "Excellent work, Evelyn," I said quietly, the anticipation of the coming destruction making my pulse race. "Now that the stolen money is secure, we can finally shift our attention to the main event. Chelsea's rehearsal dinner is tomorrow night. It is time to start dismantling their entire social reality piece by single piece." The silence was a weapon I wielded with absolute surgical precision. For the next 5 days, I completely ceased to exist in the physical world. I remained locked inside the secure corporate suite Evelyn had arranged for me, directly across the street from her downtown law firm. My entire reality was confined to those 4 pristine walls, sustained by a strict regimen of delivery meals, black coffee, and precisely timed doses of prescription anti-inflammatory medication. My shattered right arm throbbed with a dull, relentless ache beneath the heavy fiberglass cast, and my fractured ribs made taking a deep breath feel like inhaling crushed glass. But the physical agony only served to sharpen my focus. I needed my family to believe their brutal, desperate strategy had worked flawlessly. I needed them to wake up every single morning and believe that their unstable, unreliable daughter was hiding in total fear. I needed my father to think his obsolete, fraudulent medical power of attorney had terrified me into absolute submission. By going completely dark, offering no legal threats, sending no angry text messages, and making zero demands for the return of my stolen keys and smartphone, I fed his massive corporate ego the exact narrative he required. He assumed I was broken and defeated. He lowered his guard, convinced that he had all the time in the world to launder the money after the wedding dust finally settled. He was completely unaware that his stolen offshore safety net was already frozen solid. While I maintained my absolute silence, Evelyn operated with terrifying legal efficiency. We had the high-definition security footage of the brutal assault, and we had the irrefutable digital logs proving the unauthorized international wire transfer of my life savings. Evelyn did not waste time alerting the local police or warning my father's attorneys. She walked those files directly into the private chambers of a superior court judge she had known for decades. The judge took one look at the clear video of my sister shoving me down the stairs, cross-referenced the timestamps with the bank records, showing my father draining my accounts, while I lay in a hospital bed, and signed an expedited ex parte civil freeze without a second of hesitation. The family trust was entirely quarantined. My father could not withdraw a single dime. He could not transfer the funds to a secondary holding account, and he could not use the capital as collateral to hold off his private creditors. The trap was set perfectly and silently, and he had absolutely no idea he was already caught. With the money secured, my attention shifted entirely to the meticulous dismantling of their social reality. Because I could not risk my family seeing my compromised accounts coming online, Evelyn assigned a sharp, quiet junior paralegal named David to act as my digital proxy. David knew exactly how to scrape public social media profiles without leaving a traceable digital footprint. Every afternoon, he would walk into my suite, set a tablet on the glass dining table, and quietly step back so I could review the daily intelligence. Chelsea was completely unhinged with excitement. She was treating her public timeline like a reality television broadcast, posting endless, breathless updates about her final designer dress fittings, the imported luxury floral arrangements arriving at the venue, and the exclusive, highly curated seating charts for the reception. She complained playfully about the immense stress of being a high society bride, portraying herself as the exhausted but radiant center of the universe. She had violently assaulted her own sister, stolen my phone to cover her tracks, and transitioned back into her shallow, glittering reality without a single moment of guilt. On the Thursday afternoon before the rehearsal dinner, David brought me a post that eradicated the last lingering fraction of familial hesitation I possessed. I leaned over the tablet, ignoring the sharp pull in my chest, and stared at the high-definition photograph. Chelsea was standing in the opulent, sunlit grand foyer of the Oakmont Valley Country Club, previewing the venue for the upcoming gala. She was wearing a perfectly tailored white silk sundress and a radiant, utterly fake smile. Resting against her collarbone, catching the afternoon light perfectly, was my grandmother's heirloom sapphire necklace. It was the exact piece of jewelry she had violently ripped from my throat right before shoving me down a flight of hardwood stairs. I read the caption she had typed beneath the photograph. It was a masterpiece of narcissistic manipulation. She had written that it was so sad her sister's personal demons meant I could not be at her wedding, but that protecting her own peace and focusing on love was what mattered most. The sheer audacity fueled my final preparations. I sat at the glass table and methodically compiled a flawless, irrefutable physical dossier. I printed out the massive detailed credit reports showing the fraudulent lines of credit opened under my stolen identity. I highlighted the digital signatures on the vendor contracts where Chelsea had boldly impersonated me to secure the luxury catering and the custom lighting packages. I printed the Internet Protocol logs matching the digital timestamps of the loan applications directly to the unique network identifier of my father's home office router. The evidence was bulletproof, entirely devoid of emotion, and mathematically perfect. I placed every printed page into a thick black leather binder. Tucked securely into a small pocket on the inside cover of the binder was a highly encrypted flash drive containing the raw, unedited 4,000 pixel resolution security footage from my home network server. My parents had spent my entire life telling me I was a disappointment, a boring data analyst who lacked the charisma and drive to succeed in their world. They were about to learn exactly what a senior forensic auditor was capable of doing to a fraudulent enterprise. Friday evening arrived with a heavy overcast sky setting the perfect atmosphere for the rehearsal gala. The event was scheduled to begin at 7 o'clock at the Oakmont Valley Country Club. This was the night the true power players were gathering. Ryan's highly influential parents, local politicians, and a meticulously selected list of high society friends were all in attendance. I dressed for war. I wore a sharp-tailored charcoal suit that I had purchased specifically because the jacket could be draped and secured over the bulky fiberglass cast on my right arm. The medical sling supporting my elbow was solid black, blending in seamlessly with the dark fabric of the suit. I looked entirely professional, completely composed, and totally devoid of the tragic, unhinged persona my family had assigned to me. A sharp knock at the door of the suite signaled Evelyn's arrival. She stepped into the room wearing a pristine navy blazer, and walking directly behind her was Detective Miller. He did not look like the skeptical, dismissive officer who had interrogated me in the hospital trauma bay 5 days earlier. He looked absolutely furious. Evelyn had spent the entire afternoon walking him through the digital dossier. She had shown him the unedited cloud footage of the assault and the undeniable financial logs proving my father's wire fraud. Detective Miller looked at my pale face and the heavy cast supporting my arm, a deep professional shame registering in his posture. He had allowed a wealthy, well-dressed family to manipulate his instincts and convince him to dismiss a victim of violent domestic abuse. He was holding a thick manila folder containing 3 active signed arrest warrants authorized by a local judge just an hour prior. I looked at the detective and told him I needed exactly 10 minutes inside the venue before he executed those warrants. I told him I needed a brief window to return my sister's wedding invitation in person. He looked at the leather dossier, resting under my good arm, understood exactly what I was asking for, and nodded once. He agreed to hold the perimeter with his partner and wait for my signal. The drive to the country club was completely silent. The sprawling, impeccably manicured grounds were illuminated by hundreds of twinkling fairy lights strung through the ancient oak trees. The valet line was packed with imported luxury vehicles. We bypassed the main reception desk, entirely moving with a dark, undeniable authority that caused the venue staff to step back without asking a single question. Detective Miller and a second plainclothes fraud investigator trailed quietly behind Evelyn and me as we approached the heavy mahogany doors of the grand ballroom. Muffled laughter and the soft, elegant strains of a live string quartet filtered through the thick wood. I placed my uninjured left hand against the cool brass handle and pushed the door open just a fraction of an inch to listen to the activity inside. The massive ballroom was a spectacle of stolen, fraudulent luxury. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm golden glow over dozens of tables draped in pristine white linen and covered in massive floral centerpieces. Politicians, wealthy socialites, and Ryan's incredibly influential family sat mesmerized by the man standing at the front of the room. My father was holding a microphone standing under a spotlight, delivering a masterfully crafted, deeply manipulative toast. He spoke passionately to the crowd about the unbreakable bonds of family, the importance of absolute honesty in marriage, and the deep, silent tragedy of mental illness. He paused perfectly, letting a heavy theatrical sorrow fill the room, and actually shed a fake tear as he lamented the absence of his troubled, deeply unwell eldest daughter. He raised his glass of imported champagne, proposing a toast to Ryan's family and the beautiful, seamless union of 2 perfect households. I shoved the heavy mahogany doors completely open. They hit the interior walls with a dull, resonant thud that cut cleanly through the polite applause. I stepped into the ballroom, holding my head incredibly high, my posture radiating absolute chilling authority. Evelyn flanked my right side, her briefcase clutched tightly in her hand. The 2 plainclothes detectives stepped in directly behind us, their presence casting a serious, undeniable shadow over the opulent setting. The string quartet stopped playing mid-note. The clinking of crystal glasses ceased instantly. The silence that fell over the massive room was absolute and suffocating. 200 wealthy guests turned in their expensive seats, staring at the woman who was supposed to be locked away in a secure psychiatric ward. My mother, Catherine, was seated at the head table of honor draped in designer silk. She spotted me instantly. The color drained entirely from her face, leaving her perfectly applied makeup looking like a grotesque painted mask. She shot up from her chair, her gown rustling loudly in the dead quiet room. She rushed forward, intercepting us halfway down the central aisle. She leaned in close, her eyes wide with sheer, unadulterated panic whisper, shouting through clenched teeth. She demanded to know what I was doing and frantically signaled to a nearby catering manager, urgently demanding that security be called immediately to remove the trespasser who was ruining her daughter's rehearsal gala. I did not raise my voice. I did not blink. I looked right through her as if she were made of glass. I stepped around her frantic, trembling form and walked directly toward the head table. My eyes were locked exclusively on Ryan's father, the stoic, incredibly powerful patriarch of the political dynasty my family was so desperately trying to infiltrate. I stopped directly in front of him. I reached over with my uninjured left hand and placed the thick, heavy printed dossier flat on the white linen tablecloth right next to his untouched dinner plate. I looked him dead in the eye. Before you merge your family's assets with theirs, I stated, my voice ringing out with crystal clear clinical precision that carried to the very back of the silent room. You should review their recent loan applications. I turned my head and gave a sharp, definitive nod toward the elevated audiovisual booth at the back of the ballroom. Evelyn had spent $5,000 of her firm's discretionary funds an hour earlier to ensure the sympathetic venue manager understood exactly what needed to happen. The massive high-definition projector screens that flanked the stage, which were currently displaying a looped romantic slideshow of Chelsea and Ryan walking on a beach, flickered and went entirely black. A second later, the pristine 4,000-pixel resolution security footage from my home network illuminated the ballroom. The audio track was patched directly into the premium surround sound system. The entire high society crowd watched in absolute paralyzed horror. They saw Chelsea's face contorted in an ugly, entitled sneer. They heard her shrieking aggressive demands for the jewelry. They watched her violently tackle me, physically rip the heirloom sapphire necklace from my throat, and brutally shove me down the long flight of hardwood stairs. The agonizing, visceral sound of my arm shattering against the floorboards echoed loudly through the dining room. They watched the beautiful, radiant bride to be step callously over my groaning, broken body, to steal my purse and my phone from the entryway table before casually walking out the front door. Chaos erupted instantly. The carefully constructed illusion shattered into a million irreparable pieces. Ryan stood up from his chair, his face pale with absolute visceral disgust. He looked at the massive projector screen, then looked down at Chelsea, who was trembling uncontrollably, her hands covering her mouth in sheer, undeniable terror. Ryan did not yell. He did not cause a scene. He simply reached out, grabbed Chelsea's left hand, and coldly, forcefully pulled the massive custom diamond engagement ring off her finger. He dropped the ring onto the white tablecloth, turned his back on her without a single word, and signaled his horrified parents. The entire political dynasty stood up in unison and walked quickly toward the exit, physically distancing themselves from the radioactive fallout of my family's fraud. My father scrambled frantically toward the side of the stage, desperately trying to yank the thick black power cords from the wall to stop the projector, looking like a pathetic, ruined old man whose empire had finally collapsed. My mother collapsed onto the polished wooden dance floor, launching into a series of loud, performative sobs, trying to garner any shred of sympathy from the disgusted, murmuring crowd. Detective Miller stepped forward from the shadows, his silver badge clearly visible on his belt. He walked directly up to Chelsea, his voice loud and authoritative over the din of the room. He recited her Miranda rights, officially placing her under arrest for felony aggravated assault and grand larceny. The sharp metallic click of the steel handcuffs snapping shut around her wrists echoed loudly over my mother's crying. The second plainclothes detective moved swiftly to the stage, physically restraining my father and pulling his hands behind his back, detaining him for multiple counts of wire fraud and massive identity theft. Catherine crawled across the floor toward me, her carefully styled hair falling in messy strands across her tear-stained face. She reached out her hands, grasping desperately at the hem of my charcoal suit jacket. "We are your family," she wailed, her voice cracking with pure selfish desperation as she looked up at me and begged for mercy. I looked down at her, feeling absolutely nothing. I felt no anger, no sorrow, and no regret. I felt only a complete chilling detachment. I smoothly pulled my jacket out of her frantic grasp. "You stopped being my family the moment you told me to lie about my broken bones," I stated, my voice completely empty of all warmth or hesitation. "I am just correcting the record." I turned my back on the entire room. I walked steadily down the center aisle, my left hand resting gently on my medical sling, and pushed through the heavy mahogany doors out into the cool, crisp night air. I walked toward the waiting car, leaving my abusers behind, to face the devastating, inescapable reality of their own calculated destruction. I was finally free to reclaim my home, my finances, and my life. The story of Abigail's quiet, devastating retaliation serves as a powerful reminder that the deepest betrayals often come from those who are supposed to protect us. Toxic family dynamics, especially those built on the golden child and scapegoat paradigm, thrive in the shadows of emotional manipulation and financial abuse. Abigail's parents and sister weaponized their familial bond, assuming her lifelong conditioning to seek their approval would keep her docile. They prioritized the illusion of high society perfection over the safety, autonomy, and well-being of their own daughter. However, Abigail's journey teaches us that true power lies in cold, unshakable clarity. When confronted with overwhelming betrayal, her response was not a chaotic emotional outburst, which is exactly what her abusers anticipated and hoped to use to discredit her. Instead, she leveraged her expertise, her intellect, and her independence to methodically dismantle their house of cards. She reminds us that boundaries are not just emotional, they are practical, financial, and fiercely legal. We learn that true security comes from within, cultivated through our own hard work and vigilance. The very skills her family mocked became the ultimate instruments of her liberation. Abigail's meticulous counterstrike demonstrates that you do not have to accept the narrative your abusers assign to you. You are not obligated to protect the reputations of people who would gladly mortgage your future to fund their vanity. Standing your ground with irrefutable facts and unwavering resolve is not an act of malice. It is an act of ultimate self-respect. Sometimes walking away from toxic blood ties is the only way to find your true freedom. Share your stories of resilience and triumph in the comments below, especially if you have ever had to draw a hard line against toxic family members who mistook your kindness for weakness. If Abigail's journey to freedom resonated with you, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and share this video with anyone who might need a reminder that their worth is never defined by those who fail to see it. Remember, your future belongs to you, and your truth is your absolute greatest weapon.